History remembers the battles, the generals, the causes, but what if we've only scratched the surface of the American Civil War? Beneath the familiar stories lies a darker, stranger layer. Whispers of entire regiments that vanished without a trace, encrypted letters never decoded, and artifacts unearthed in places no soldier should have been. There are reports of ghostly figures still marching through the woods of Tennessee. Eyewitnesses who spoke of advanced technologies years before their time and secret societies whose influence may have steered the course of the war from behind velvet curtains. These aren't tales from fiction. These are the overlooked footnotes, the curious inconsistencies, the forgotten files locked away in dusty archives. So what really happened between 1861 and 1865? And what truths might still be hidden beneath the blood-stained soil of America's past? Cue subtle music swells fading into a haunting violin. So sit back, take a deep breath, and join us as we uncover the mysterious side of the Civil War you were never meant to see. Somewhere in the rolling foothills of Georgia, a stream glistens beneath dappled sunlight, winding quietly through a forgotten forest. The water is cold, clear, and deceptively ordinary. But local legend says that beneath these rocks and roots, deep in the clay, something extraordinary might be buried. Treasure, not just any treasure, but millions in gold, silver, and currency vanished during the chaotic final days of the American Civil War. This is the story of the lost Confederate gold. It begins not in mystery, but in desperation. By the spring of 1865, the Confederate States of America were collapsing. Richmond had fallen. General Lee was on the run. The government of the Confederacy, such as it was, had become a wandering caravan. Jefferson Davis and his cabinet fled southward with what little remained of the Confederate treasury. Coins, bullion, and jewelry hastily withdrawn from banks and government vaults. Records confirm that in early April a guarded train left Richmond. Aboard it were the last hopes of a dying nation. A treasure estimated at several 100,000 at the time, many millions in today's terms. This included gold bars, silver ingots, Mexican pesos, British sovereigns, and private banknotes. Some accounts mention crates filled with family heirlooms donated to the cause by Southern elites, hoping to fund the resistance just a little longer. From Richmond, the train moved southward through North Carolina and into Georgia. Then in mid-May, after the official surrender, Davis was captured near Irwinville, but the gold was gone, so where did it go? Here, fact gives way to uncertainty. Official Union reports suggest that only a fraction of the treasure was ever recovered. Some of it certainly was looted by both Union soldiers and desperate Confederates alike, but not all, not even close. One version of the story places the gold in Washington, Georgia, where Davis and his entourage made one of their final stops. Locals spoke of a chaotic scene. Wagons unloading heavy crates into banks, carriages riding off in the night, men burning documents and speaking in hushed voices. Some believe a portion of the treasure was hidden in the town's vaults or buried nearby. Yet searches have yielded nothing conclusive. Others say the gold was entrusted to Confederate sympathizers in the area who were sworn to secrecy and took their knowledge to the grave. A few later confessed to moving coins in the dark of night, scattering the hoard across farms, wells, and cemeteries. Some claim they were ordered to dump the heavier bullion in the Okolgie River to prevent Union capture. Divers have explored its depths, but no treasure has ever been officially found. And then there's the infamous story of the Midnight Riders, a group of Confederate loyalists who, according to post-war law, spirited away large portions of the treasure on horseback, distributing it to safe houses across the South. No ledgers, no witnesses, just a whisper in the wind, and a handful of recovered coins in barns and backyards, too few to tell the whole story. Even more puzzling are the traces of the treasure that did resurface, often far from Georgia. In 1872, a man in Arkansas claimed to have discovered a buried cache of Confederate coins wrapped in oilskin. In the 30s, a sealed iron box of Civil War-era gold pieces was dug up near Savannah. And as recently as the 80s, a trove of silver with pre-1865 mint marks surfaced in a collapsed cellar near Mon. But each time the find was fragmentary, enticing, but never definitive. Could it all be coincidence or evidence of a larger concealed operation? Over time, the legend grew. Some began to believe the gold wasn't lost at all, but hidden intentionally as part of a long-term plan. Certain theorists point to secret orders allegedly issued by Confederate agents late in the war. outlining contingency plans to hide and protect Confederate wealth. The Knights of the Golden Circle, a pro-S society active before and during the war, are sometimes linked to these efforts. Though largely dismissed by mainstream historians, the group is said to have had extensive underground networks, and some even suggest they intended to use the gold to finance a second rebellion. Is it possible that some of the treasure ended up overseas? Confederate operatives had long maintained contacts in England, France, and even Mexico. Could some of the wealth have been transferred quietly, exchanged through neutral ports or secret shipments? There is no hard proof, but the possibility lingers. Others believe the gold is still buried in the southern soil, possibly within private land, protected by generations of silence. Maps have surfaced over the years. Faded, cryptic, sometimes clearly fabricated. Still, treasure hunters follow them. Metal detectors hum across forests and fields, and occasionally something glitters in the dirt. But the question remains, if such a treasure ever existed in its rumoured form, why has it never been fully recovered? Is it because it was never concentrated in one place? Perhaps it was scattered intentionally, a symbolic gesture to deny the Union its spoils. Or maybe it was recovered quietly, absorbed into the post-war economy by those with the power and means to keep it secret. Then again, perhaps the legend itself has grown larger than the truth, amplified by time, grief, and the South's enduring mythos. As the fog rolls through the woods of Georgia and rivers carry whispers of the past down to the sea, the mystery of the lost Confederate gold endures, not as a certainty, but as a question echoing through history. What happened to the last treasure of the Confederacy, and who, if anyone, still holds its key? In a quiet, overgrown thicket near the banks of the Rappahannock River in Virginia, time seems to slow. The wind rustles through skeletal trees, and the faint cry of a bird echoes in the distance. This place, long abandoned, holds a peculiar weight because it was here, according to official records, that the man who murdered President Abraham Lincoln met his end. Or did he? John Wilkes Booth, actor, Confederate sympathizer, and one of the most infamous names in American history, was believed to have been shot and killed on April 26, 1865, just 12 days after he fired a single bullet into the back of Lincoln's head at Ford's Theatre. A manhunt unlike any the country had never seen culminated in a tobacco barn set ablaze. Union soldiers surrounded the structure, and a man inside, believed to be Booth, was shot by Sergeant Boston Corbett and later died of his wounds. But almost immediately, doubt began to creep into the edges of the story. The official narrative is straightforward. Booth, wounded and desperate, fled south on horseback with co-conspirator David Herold. Tracked by Union cavalry, the pair was cornered on a farm owned by Richard Garrett. After Herold surrendered, the barn was set on fire to flush Booth out. He refused. A shot rang out. Booth was carried outside, paralysed, and died hours later. His body was hastily examined, buried in secret, and later interred at the Booth family plot in Baltimore. Yet not everyone was convinced that the man who died at Garrett's farm was truly John Wilkes Booth. The first cracks in the story came from those who saw the body. Several witnesses claimed the corpse didn't match Booth's known appearance. A wart on the back of his neck was reportedly missing. His hair colour seemed off. Even Booth's own dentist, upon later inspection, couldn't confirm a match based on dental records, such as they were in the 19th century. Booth's autopsy was conducted under chaotic conditions. No official photographs were released to the public. His remains were kept under tight control, first by the War Department, then by his family. Given the nation's unrest, secrecy may have seemed necessary, but the lack of transparency only fueled speculation. And then the rumours began. Over the decades that followed, sightings of Booth were reported from all corners of the United States and beyond. A man in Texas claimed to have treated Booth for a broken leg. A bartender in Missouri said Booth drank at his saloon well into the 1880s. One of the most persistent tales centres on Enid, Oklahoma, where a man named David E. George allegedly confessed on his deathbed in 1903 to being none other than John Wilkes Booth. George's confession sparked a media frenzy. His body was mummified and displayed in carnivals and dime museums across the country under the label "The Man Who Shot Lincoln." Though tests were conducted, including a 1931 examination comparing the mummy's scars to known injuries Booth sustained during his escape, the results were inconclusive and no definitive proof ever linked to Booth beyond speculation and anecdotal evidence. So, if Booth didn't die in that barn, what happened? Some believe he escaped south, aided by a Confederate underground network that helped him cross into Mexico or even further to South America. It's not an impossible theory. In the final days of the war, many Confederate leaders and sympathizers fled abroad to avoid prosecution. Others suspect Booth lived in the American West under various aliases, haunted by his crime, but protected by powerful allies. Another theory suggests the government may have known Booth, survived, and chose to cover it up. Why? To prevent further unrest, to control the narrative, or perhaps to protect individuals who may have helped orchestrate the assassination. Individuals with political connections the public would not have tolerated being exposed. Of course, these ideas remain highly speculative. No verifiable evidence has ever surfaced to confirm a successful escape. And yet no theory has ever fully accounted for the inconsistencies surrounding his reported death. Could it simply be a case of mistaken identity? In the chaos of war and the desperation to bring Lincoln's assassin to justice, perhaps soldiers truly believed they had cornered the right man. A case of being close enough, a tragic misidentification. Or is the legend of Booth's escape just that, a legend? A reflection of America's deep need to wrestle with unresolved grief, betrayal, and the complexities of justice in a fractured nation. Still, modern attempts to settle the question have not been without controversy. In the 1990s, descendants of the Booth family petitioned to exhume his remains for DNA testing. The request was denied. Later efforts to test vertebrae stored at the National Museum of Health and Medicine, purportedly from Booth's autopsy, have also stalled, mired in bureaucratic and ethical complications, and so, more than 50 years later, the mystery remains. Was justice served in a burning Virginia barn, or did John Wilkes Booth escape into the shadows, his story blending into the mythos of a nation still reeling from its bloodiest conflict? As the flickering lanterns of history grow dim, we are left with only partial truths, conflicting testimonies, and a trail that may have gone cold long ago. But the questions linger, unanswered, persistent. Who was the man who died at Garrett's farm? And could John Wilkes Booth, America's most infamous assassin, have lived to see a future he tried to destroy? It sits under glass now, preserved in the dim light of the Ford's Theatre, National Historic Site in Washington, D.C. An ordinary-looking leather-bound diary, its edges weathered, its clasp rusted with time. To the casual eye, it's just another artifact of a chaotic past. But for those who have studied the tangled legacy of John Wilkes Booth, this worn journal may hold, or may have once held, the answers to one of the most haunting questions of the Civil War era. What was Booth really thinking in the final days of his life? And more intriguingly, why are at least 18 pages missing from the middle of his diary? The diary was recovered from Booth's body, or what the War Department claimed to be Booth's body after the confrontation at Garrett's farm in Virginia. Hidden in his coat pocket, the book was wrapped in a small pouch and stained with blood. Inside, Booth had scrolled entries during his 12-day flight from justice after assassinating President Abraham Lincoln on April 14, 1865. He wrote by candlelight in forests and barns. His sentences were hurried, looping, and often difficult to read. Some lines expressed remorse, not for the act itself, but for being misunderstood. Others read more like a manifesto laced with righteous fury and frustration. But as historians and forensic analysts began to study the diary, an unsettling detail became clear. The journal had been altered. Entire sheets had been cut out neatly, cleanly, as if with a blade. Between the dated entries, gaps opened where full sections should have been. The missing pages were not torn in haste. They were removed with deliberate care. Today, 4 pages remain in Booth's diary, but researchers agree that at least 18, perhaps more, are gone. Why and by whom? The diary was taken into custody by the War Department and remained there out of public view for nearly 2 years. When it was finally entered into evidence during the 1807 conspiracy trial of John Surratt, one of Booth's accused co-conspirators, the missing pages became a matter of official concern. Yet no clear explanation was ever provided. The government's position was vague. Some claimed the pages had never existed, that they were simply blank leaves removed by clerks or archivists for conservation. Others insisted they had been torn out before the diary reached military hands. But not everyone was convinced. In 1977, historian David Bolsiger and journalist Charles E. Sear reignited the controversy when they revealed that several of the missing diary pages had been found in the private papers of Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War during the Lincoln administration. Stanton, a staunch Union loyalist and a key figure in the pursuit of Booth, had led the investigation into the assassination with uncompromising intensity. This revelation, though not conclusively verified, added fuel to suspicions that the government may have removed specific content from the diary, not for preservation but for suppression. What could have been on those pages? Some believe Booth may have named individuals involved in the broader conspiracy, names too politically dangerous to reveal. In Booth's known entries, he repeatedly insisted he acted for the South, but not alone. He described himself as a tool of others, a phrase that has sparked years of speculation. Could the missing pages have contained accusations against prominent Union figures, or perhaps details of secret meetings, coded instructions, or foreign connections? One fringe theory suggests Booth had ties to Southern operatives working through Canadian safe houses and even foreign agents in Britain or France. If true, such connections might have threatened fragile post-war diplomacy and may have been intentionally erased. Another possibility is that Booth may have written about plots that extended beyond Lincoln. Historians know that the original plan wasn't assassination, but abduction, and Booth, according to several testimonies, had been in contact with Confederate intelligence networks long before the shooting. So what if the diary contained evidence of a wider agenda? What if Lincoln wasn't the only target? And yet there is another interpretation. Some researchers argue that the missing pages might have been removed by Booth himself. On the run, exhausted and paranoid, he may have destroyed early drafts or self-incriminating thoughts, editing his own story for posterity. After all, he was an actor by trade, a performer, and he knew his every word would be scrutinized. Still, the surgical nature of the missing leaves raises more questions than it answers. In 1997, the FBI used forensic analysis to examine the diary's binding and ink composition. Their report confirmed the pages were indeed cut with a blade after the diary was already in Booth's possession. The mystery deepened when handwriting analysts concluded that the remaining entries were authentic, written in Booth's hand, but left open the possibility that additional content had been selectively extracted before or during the War Department's custody. To this day, the missing pages have not been found. No official archive holds them. No descendant has stepped forward with hidden documents, and yet the rumour persists that somewhere, tucked in a private collection, lost in the dusty recesses of a forgotten drawer, those pages may still exist. The Booth diary remains a puzzle within a puzzle, a silent witness to a shattered nation, a book that may hold secrets too dangerous or too inconvenient to bring into the light, so we're left to wonder, what truths did John Wilkes Booth take with him into the shadows, and what might be revealed if those missing pages were ever found? In the foothills of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, the air is thick with age and silence. Just outside the quiet town of Bedford, the woods stretch endlessly, shadowed by ancient trees and carpeted with moss-covered stone. The soil here has been turned countless times by farmers, by hunters, and by treasure seekers driven by a cryptic riddle nearly 2 centuries old. A riddle that might point to the greatest hidden treasure in American history, or to nothing at all. This is the legend of the Beale ciphers. 3 coded texts are said to reveal the location of a buried fortune in gold, silver, and jewels. But beneath the surface of the story lies a question far more elusive than lost treasure. Could these mysterious papers conceal secrets far more politically charged? Secrets tied not to the frontier but to the Confederacy. The tale begins officially in the 1820s. A man named Thomas Jefferson Beale, whose origins remain largely unverified, allegedly entrusted a locked iron box to an innkeeper in Lynchburg, Virginia. Inside were papers, some in plain English, others encrypted with numerical codes. Beale claimed he had hidden a massive treasure discovered during a Western expedition, and the box contained instructions for locating it. He promised to return and reveal the key to the ciphers. He never came back. Years later, the innkeeper opened the box and, with the help of a friend, managed to decode one of the 3 ciphers. That single deciphered message described a buried treasure worth over $1 million in today's value, hidden somewhere in Bedford County. But the other 2 ciphers containing the treasury's exact location and the names of its rightful heirs remain unsolved. The B papers were first published in 1885 by James B. Ward. Since then, scholars, cryptologists, and amateur codebreakers have spent generations trying to unlock the remaining ciphers. Only one thing is certain: the puzzle remains stubbornly closed. At first glance, this story feels like folklore, another Gold Rush-era legend mixing greed and mystery. But over time, the cipher's context began to raise deeper questions. The most perplexing of them: why did the only decoded message use the Declaration of Independence as its cipher key? In code-deering, a key is typically a random or agreed-upon document used to crack a numerical cipher. But someone posing as him used the founding document of the United States letter by letter to conceal a message about buried treasure. To some, this felt symbolic, almost too symbolic. Could there have been a political purpose behind the ciphers? Here is where Civil War intrigue begins to shadow the story. Some researchers, particularly in the mid-10th century, began to speculate that the Beale ciphers were not created in the 1820s at all, but much later, possibly during or shortly after the Civil War. According to this line of thinking, the Beale legend might have been a smokescreen concealing Confederate secrets embedded within the encrypted texts. During the final years of the war, as Confederate defeat seemed inevitable, Southern leadership took steps to hide money, documents, and sensitive information. Records show that gold and currency were moved across state lines, concealed in mines, or buried on private land. Could the Beale ciphers have been a code used to protect some of these operations? If so, was the treasure described in the deciphered message simply a metaphor or a cover for something more covert? One theory suggests that Thomas Beale never existed at all, and that the name is a cipher in itself. Thomas Jefferson Beale, a name that, combining the author of the Declaration of Independence with a surname tied to Virginia aristocracy, could have been an intentional construction meant to disguise the cipher's true origin. If the ciphers were developed by Confederate agents or sympathizers, might they have embedded them in a legend crafted to appear older and less politically charged? More intriguing still are the odd patterns and statistical anomalies within the undercoded ciphers. Professional crypt analysts, including experts at the NSA, have examined them and found characteristics that suggest either extreme complexity or outright fabrication. Yet the fact remains, despite generations of analysis, no one has definitively cracked them. Another fringe theory ties the Beale ciphers to the Knights of the Golden Circle, a secret society of Southern sympathizers who aimed to preserve slavery and Southern influence across the Western Hemisphere. This group is rumoured to have buried caches of weapons, money, and documents throughout the American South and Midwest. The notion that the B ciphers could point not to gold and silver, but to KGC treasure, or worse, to secret plans never meant to be uncovered, has intrigued conspiracy theorists for decades. Of course, more grounded interpretations exist. Many believe the Beale story is simply a 9th century hoax, an elaborate confidence trick designed to sell pamphlets or stir adventure in a post-war nation hungry for legend. The lack of hard evidence, the anonymity of sources, and the literary flair of the original publication do suggest fabrication. And yet something lingers to this day. The exact authorship of the Beale papers is uncertain. The original cipher sheets have disappeared. The location of the alleged treasure has never been identified, but the second and third ciphers filled with seemingly deliberate numbers and repeating patterns continue to defy easy dismissal. So what are we really looking at? A buried fortune, a coded political message, or an elaborate game meant to mislead everyone? As the sun sets behind the Blue Ridge, casting long shadows over the Virginia hills, the question remains open. Are the Beale ciphers nothing more than a treasure hunter's dream? Or could they still hold secrets, buried not only in the earth, but in the very heart of America's divided past? At the edge of the Mississippi River, just north of Memphis, the water moves with deceptive calm. Wide and slow, it carries with it stories long submerged beneath the silt and current. Near here, in the early morning hours of April 27, 1865, a fiery explosion tore through the stillness, splintering wood, igniting steam, and plunging hundreds of men into the cold, dark river. The vessel was the Sultana, a sidewheel steamboat that had once seemed destined for obscurity. But in death, it became infamous, claiming more lives than the Titanic, and yet largely forgotten by history. Why? And more haunting still, was the disaster truly an accident or the result of a deliberate act of sabotage? The Sultana had been built for comfort, not conflict. Elegant in design, she measured 261 feet long with tall twin stacks and a broad paddle wheel churning at her stern. But by April 1865, as the Civil War drew to a close, she was pressed into government service, tasked with transporting recently released Union prisoners of war from southern camps like Cahaba and Andersonville back to the north. By the time the Sultana left Vicksburg, she was overcrowded to a staggering degree. Her legal capacity was 376 passengers. That morning she carried over 200, most of them emaciated, ill or wounded soldiers finally returning home. Eyewitnesses recall the deck sagging under the weight, the air thick with smoke and fatigue. Then, just after 2 a.m, as the steamboat steamed northward under cover of night, 3 of her 4 boilers exploded in rapid succession. The blast obliterated the centre of the ship. Fire spread almost instantly. Survivors, many still weak from months in Confederate prison camps, were thrown into the river or forced to jump. Some drowned, others clung to driftwood, floating for hours in the dark. Over 100 people died. It remains the deadliest maritime disaster in American history. Yet even as newspapers reported the death toll, the nation's attention had already shifted, consumed by the death of President Lincoln just days earlier, and the manhunt for his assassin, John Wilkes Booth. In the shadow of national mourning, the tragedy of the Sultana slipped quietly into the background. Official inquiries at the time blamed the disaster on mechanical failure. The boilers, hastily repaired in Vicksburg, were known to be problematic. Some witnesses testified that the patchwork job had been rushed, overseen by mechanics under pressure to keep the boat moving. The Mississippi was at flood stage, its swift current and debris placing added strain on the vessel. A perfect storm of poor maintenance, overcrowding and bad luck, they said. But not everyone agreed. From the very beginning, whispers of foul play began to circulate. Could such a catastrophic failure have been the result of more than neglect? Could someone, some group, have wanted the Sultana destroyed? One theory points to Confederate agents, many of whom remained active in the weeks following this surrender at Appomattox. Even after the fall of Richmond, small bands of Confederate loyalists were suspected of carrying out acts of sabotage in northern cities, including arson and rail disruption. Sabotage was not unknown. In fact, just 1 year earlier, a Confederate agent named Robert Layden had reportedly bragged about sinking Union steamboats using a coal torpedo, an explosive disguised to look like an ordinary lump of fuel. These torpedoes, when shoveled into a boiler's firebox, could cause a delayed but devastating explosion. Could such a device have made its way onto the Sultana? Some survivors thought so. Others reported seeing a suspicious man near the boilers just before the blast, an unknown figure who vanished in the chaos. But the evidence was thin, the testimonies inconsistent. By the time any formal investigation could begin, the wreckage had sunk into the river and much of the evidence with it. Another layer of mystery surrounds the ship's overcrowding. How did a vessel designed for a few hundred end up with over 2,000 men crammed on board? It's here the trail leads to corruption. Captain James Cass Mason, the Sultana's master, was offered a financial incentive by Union Army officers in Vicksburg. Government contracts paid per soldier transported, creating a grim reward system for taking on as many men as possible. Some accounts suggest that other, more stable ships were bypassed in favour of the Sultana, despite her known mechanical issues. Was this negligence, greed, or was there a larger cover-up in play, one designed to keep certain officers' misdeeds from reaching public light? In 1888, decades after the disaster, an eyewitness named William Streeter reignited the sabotage theory. He claimed to have seen a man, a known Confederate agent, near the fuel supply shortly before departure. His claims were never officially substantiated. Modern researchers have continued to probe the incident. In the 1980s, author Jerry Potter compiled extensive survivor accounts and government records, presenting both the case for mechanical failure and the possibility of sabotage. He, like many others, found no smoking gun, but plenty of smoke. And that's what makes the story of the Sultana so enduring. There is no single villain, no final report, only fragments, testimony, rumour, submerged wreckage left for historians and investigators to assemble into something resembling truth. The river still holds its secrets. The remains of the Sultana lie buried beneath the farmland just outside Memphis, far from where the Mississippi now flows. The waters have shifted, the memories faded, but the questions remain, quietly echoing through time. Was the destruction of the Sultana a tragic accident born of carelessness and corruption, or a final silent act of war? And if it was sabotage, who was responsible? And why has the truth remained hidden for so long? Deep in the woods of rural Kentucky, a rusted iron ring juts from the earth like a forgotten relic. Around it, time-worn stones mark what might have once been the foundation of an old lodge, or perhaps something else entirely. The locals say it was a meeting ground, a place where shadows gathered in secrecy long before the war began. A place tied to a name that has haunted the margins of Civil War history for over 50 years, the Order of the Golden Circle. To some, the Order was little more than a fringe political society, one of many that flickered briefly in the turbulent years before secession. But to others, it was far more dangerous. A secret organisation with grand ambitions to reshape the Western Hemisphere and a network of sympathisers that may have continued operating long after the Confederacy fell. But what exactly was the Order of the Golden Circle? Founded in the 1850s by George W. L. Bickley, a Texas-born doctor, writer and rabid Southern nationalist, the Order began as a group of like-minded expansionists. Their goal was audacious to create a vast slave empire extending from the southern United States into Mexico, the Caribbean and Central America. A literal golden circle of pro-slavery territories encircling the Gulf of Mexico, with Havana at its symbolic centre. Their plan involved invasion, annexation and the spread of what they called Southern values. And in an era when filibustering expeditions, private military ventures into Latin America were not uncommon, the idea wasn't as far-fetched as it might seem today. Bickley travelled across the South, establishing local chapters, recruiting members and promoting the OGC, as it was sometimes abbreviated, as the vanguard of a coming revolution. He held meetings in secret, administered oaths, and raised funds for future campaigns. The group reportedly used coded symbols, passwords, and complex rituals to preserve its secrecy. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the OGC's ambitions seemed to align with the Confederacy's own. But while the Confederate government never officially endorsed the order, rumours of overlapping membership persisted. Some claimed that Confederate officials consulted with Golden Circle agents. Others believed the order acted independently, running espionage rings, hoarding weapons, and preparing for a post-war resurgence. By 1863, the name Order of the Golden Circle began appearing in Union intelligence reports. Federal agents viewed the group as a genuine threat. In border states like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, authorities accused OGC members of plotting uprisings, sabotaging military infrastructure, and harbouring Confederate prisoners. The Northern press picked up the story, referring to them as Copperheads or Southern sympathisers in the North. Some reports were likely exaggerated, part of the war's psychological front, but others spoke of real arrests, real caches of weapons, and documents seized from hidden clubhouses. And yet, as quickly as it had emerged, the order seemed to vanish. By the time the war ended in 1865, Bickley had been arrested. The Confederate cause was lost, and the OGC faded from public view. Historians largely dismissed it as a failed footnote, a Southern secret society whose ambitions were buried along with the Confederacy. But was that truly the end of the Golden Circle? In the decades that followed, rumours of a second, more secretive phase of the organisation began to circulate. Stories emerged of hidden vaults, encrypted maps, and buried Confederate gold, all supposedly linked to the order and its surviving members. Theories claimed the group had gone underground, transforming itself from a political society into a shadowy brotherhood dedicated to preserving Southern ideals and preparing for a future return. This idea gained traction in the early 20th century, particularly among treasure hunters drawn to legends of vast hidden riches. Some pointed to mysterious symbols carved into the trees, stone markers resembling circles and crosses, and stories passed down through families about the Old Oath and the Circle Men. According to these accounts, the OGC had moved beyond ideology. Its focus had shifted to protection, guarding hidden stockpiles of Confederate assets, secret documents, or even plans for a Southern rebirth. These legends soon merged with tales of the Knights of the Golden Circle, a name often used interchangeably, though no direct continuity has ever been proven. One of the most persistent connections came in the form of the Jesse James conspiracy. In the 1940s and 50s, authors and researchers began to speculate that the infamous outlaw had not only survived his reported death in 1882, but had also been a high-ranking Knight of the Golden Circle. They suggested that many of his robberies were not for personal gain, but part of a larger plan to recover and redistribute Confederate wealth. Though these claims lack solid evidence, they continue to attract amateur sleuths and coda-reekers. Even today, expeditions take place across the American South and Southwest, where seekers follow supposed KGC maps marked with arcane symbols, always hoping to find one more clue, one more cache of gold or proof of a secret preserved for generations. Still, despite the folklore, no verified vault has ever been found. No document has conclusively tied the post-war order of the Golden Circle to any long-term plan, but fragments remain, letters, diaries, whispers in the dark corners of Civil War history. So the questions endure. Was the Order of the Golden Circle just another lost cause? A fantasy born of desperation and defeat? Or did its members carry something forward, something hidden beneath layers of time, secrecy, and southern legend that has yet to be uncovered? Now, as we step away from the murky secrecy of the Golden Circle and its symbols etched into stone and myth, we find ourselves in a quieter but no less haunting corner of Civil War history. This time we don't examine what was hidden underground, but rather what stirred in the mind of a man, a leader, a president, alone in the silence of the White House, tormented by a vision that seemed to whisper from the edge of time itself. It was a cold spring night in Washington, and the flickering gaslight cast long shadows across the walls of the second-floor bedroom of the White House. Abraham Lincoln, exhausted but restless, paced slowly beneath the ornate moulding, deep in thought. The war was nearly over. Richmond had fallen. The Union would prevail, and yet something pressed upon him, an unease he could not shake. He lay down, drifted into sleep, and then a dream, vivid, surreal, and chilling. Lincoln would later recount it to his closest confidants in a voice hushed and deliberate, as if speaking the words out loud might somehow give them power. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. I passed on from room to room. No living person was in sight, but the same mournful sounds of distress met me as I passed along. I finally entered the East Room. Before me was a catapult on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers acting as guards, and there was a throng of people gazing mournfully upon the corpse. I said, "Who is dead in the White House?" A soldier replied, "The President. He was killed by an assassin." The dream, according to Lincoln, occurred just days before his assassination on April 14, 1865. It is a chilling anecdote, one that would be compelling enough if told secondhand, but this was not a legend born in the aftermath of tragedy. It was Lincoln himself who reportedly shared it. First with his wife Mary Todd Lincoln, and then with his friend and bodyguard Ward Hill Layman. Layman would later recount the story in his memoirs, adding that Lincoln had experienced similar dreams before major events in the war, including battles at Antietam and Gettysburg. According to Layman, the president believed dreams held meaning, that they were not merely illusions of the subconscious, but signals, messages. But what do we make of this? Was it the result of the immense psychological pressure Lincoln endured during the war? A subconscious premonition rooted in his constant awareness of the threats against him? Or something else entirely? Historians have long wrestled with these questions. On the one hand, the record is sparse and largely anecdotal. Layman's account was published years after the assassination, and Mary Todd Lincoln's own memory, especially after the trauma of her husband's death, was often unreliable and deeply affected by grief. Skeptics argue that the story evolved over time, that the dream, if it occurred at all, was perhaps less specific or coloured by later retellings. They point to the human tendency to seek patterns in tragedy, to assign meaning to the random and the senseless. After all, is it not human nature to look backward and find the signs we missed, but even as we pause, question its authenticity? There are details that linger. The setting of the dream, the East Room, was in fact where Lincoln's body would lie in state just days later. The solemn guards, the weeping crowd, the pronouncement of an assassin's hand, too precise, some argue, to be coincidence. And Lincoln's fascination with dreams was not isolated to this single event. He reportedly spoke often of dreams of boats on the water, which he interpreted as omens, signals of approaching change, often death. In the days leading up to his assassination, he mentioned such a dream again, telling his cabinet that it had preceded almost every major turning point in the war. Could these dreams have been manifestations of a prophetic mind, or merely the product of relentless stress? More speculative theories suggest that Lincoln was somehow tuned in to something beyond himself, that he may have possessed an intuitive or even psychic sensitivity, an ability to sense the ripples of fate before they reach the shore. While mainstream historians typically avoid such interpretations, the idea persists in fringe circles supported by the uncanny clarity of his final dream. Others go further, suggesting that Lincoln's dream wasn't a prophecy at all, but a vision granted by some external force, a warning. If so, was it meant for him or for us? Still, the question remains, why would a man on the brink of victory, a president who had weathered the bloodiest conflict in American history, be haunted not by the fear of loss, but by the foreknowledge of his own death? Is it possible that Lincoln, more than any other figure of his time, had come to sense that his role in history would not extend beyond the war's end, that he, like the cause he had championed, would be sacrificed in the transition from conflict to peace? We may never know what truly passed through Lincoln's mind in those final days, whether the dream was real or embellished, a genuine vision or the shadow of dread. Its power endures, not only because of what it foretold, but because of who it came from, the great emancipator. The president who walked the White House halls alone, burdened by the nation's agony, and perhaps by the weight of something he could never fully explain. So we are left to ask, was Lincoln's dream a tragic coincidence, a subconscious reckoning with inevitable danger? Or was it something more, something still waiting to be understood? As Lincoln's haunting vision faded into the shadows of history, a very different kind of fear gripped the Union's largest and most vital city. Not born from dreams, but from smoke, real, tangible, deliberate. While the president foresaw his own end, others plotted to ignite the heart of the North in flames, their target, New York City. The city was alive with light that autumn evening. Gas lamps flickered along Broadway, illuminating horse-drawn carriages and hurried footsteps. Theatres buzzed with life, hotels brimmed with travellers and Union officers. And yet, beneath the glamour, beneath the crowded streets of November 25th, 1804, a quiet malevolence crept unnoticed into the night. That was the night New York City came dangerously close to burning. At precisely 8:45 p.m, fires began to break out across Manhattan. Nearly 20 different locations, most of them prominent hotels, were set ablaze in near-simultaneous attacks. The Fifth Avenue Hotel, the Astor House, Barnum's Museum, even the iconic Lafarge House near City Hall. Smoke began to curl from the upper floors. Panic swept through the crowds, and yet strangely none of the fires spread. Few took hold. Firefighters quickly brought them under control. Most caused little more than property damage, but the message was clear. What exactly happened that night? Who was responsible? And more disturbingly, what did they hope to achieve? According to Union officials, the answer came quickly. Confederate agents operating out of Canada had orchestrated a coordinated arson attack, a desperate attempt to bring the war to the North's doorstep and ignite chaos in the Union's greatest city. The Confederate Secret Service, in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of war, had authorized the operation through a clandestine ring of operatives known as the Confederate Army of Manhattan. 8 men, led by Captain Robert Cobb Kennedy, were said to have infiltrated New York disguised as civilians. They checked into hotels across the city. Each carried a small device, simple but effective, made of phosphorus and chemicals designed to ignite when exposed to air. Their plan was not to simply set fires, but to overwhelm the city's fire department, causing panic and morale in the Union stronghold. Had it worked, the impact could have been devastating. But it didn't work. The fires fizzled. Some failed to ignite entirely, and within days most of the operatives vanished back into the shadows. Only Kennedy was eventually caught. Arrested in January 1865 after drunkenly bragging about his role in the attack, he was tried by a military commission, convicted and hanged at Fort Lafayette, the last Confederate officer executed by the United States during the war. So ends the official version, a failed plot, a captured saboteur, justice served. But as with so many Civil War mysteries, the more one examines the incident, the more questions arise. Why did the plot fail so spectacularly? Some historians suggest the arson devices were improperly handled, perhaps ignited too early, or placed without sufficient ventilation. Others wonder whether the agents, young and inexperienced, lost their nerve. But then why target so many locations if sabotage was uncertain? Was it meant more as a symbol than a true military strike? And what of the Confederate leadership? How deeply involved were they? Official Confederate records were destroyed or lost in the war's final days, but scattered correspondence, particularly involving Jacob Thompson, the Confederate agent in Canada, hints at broader ambitions. Letters reference plans to disrupt northern cities, poison water supplies, and incite riots among the urban poor. Was the attempt to burn New York just the tip of a far more expansive sabotage campaign? Then there are stranger theories, those that creep along the edges of accepted history. Some claim that Kennedy's confession was coerced and that he was little more than a scapegoat, executed quickly before he could speak too freely. Others suggest that Union intelligence knew of the plot beforehand, allowing it to unfold in a controlled manner as a public relations tool, exposing the desperation of the Confederate cause and justifying harsh countermeasures. A few researchers point to strange anomalies in fire department logs and city records, suggesting there were more fires than officially acknowledged, or that certain locations reported smoke before any device could have been triggered. Has the attack been more successful than the government admitted? Was the full scale of the plot quietly covered up to avoid mass panic? And what of the timing? The attack occurred on November 25th, Evacuation Day, the anniversary of the British departure from New York in 1783. Coincidence or a symbolic choice meant to draw a parallel between British colonial rule and Union occupation? To this day, little physical evidence remains. The chemical devices used left few traces. The hotels were repaired, the documents sealed or lost in bureaucratic fog, but the spectre of that night still lingers, smoke rising not just from fire but from uncertainty. In modern times, the story has faded into obscurity, overshadowed by battles, assassinations and surrender. But perhaps it should not be forgotten. What does it tell us about the lengths to which desperate men will go in war? About the fine line between soldier and saboteur? About how vulnerable even the mightiest cities can be when enemies walk among the crowd armed, not with rifles but fire and silence? And most curiously of all, how close did New York come to disaster? And how much of that night's true story still lies buried beneath the ashes? As smoke curled from the charred rafters of New York's finest hotels and Union officials whispered of espionage and sabotage, another kind of mystery, quieter, stranger, lingered hundreds of miles away in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. Not one born of fire or plots, but of echoes, of apparitions, of a battle seemingly fought long after the war had ended. The fields of Gettysburg rest quietly now, gently sloping meadows broken only by old stone fences, weathered monuments, and the occasional ripple of tall grass swaying in the breeze. The names Cemetery Ridge, Devil's Den, Little Round Top still ring with historical weight, familiar to generations of Americans who have studied this defining clash of the Civil War. More than 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured here over 3 brutal July days in 1863. But the Battle of Gettysburg may not have ended when the gunfire ceased. In the years that followed, strange stories began to surface. Witnesses, some locals, others visiting tourists, spoke in hushed tones of eerie sights and inexplicable sounds. Gunshots when there were none, faint bugle calls drifting across empty fields, shadowy figures, sometimes in grey, sometimes in blue, standing perfectly still before vanishing into morning mist. The most chilling among these accounts occurred decades later on a summer evening in 1905. A group of Civil War reenactors visiting the battlefield for a commemorative event had gone to explore the area near Plum Run, not far from the site of Pickett's charge. As the sun dipped low, they claimed to see soldiers in full Union uniform emerge from the trees, marching silently, faces grim and pale, moving in perfect formation. The reenactors watched, confused. At first, they assumed the men were part of another troop performing a late drill, but something felt off. The uniforms, they later said, were too precise, worn in styles outdated even by reenactment standards. The men's rifles were old Springfield models that would have been rare by the turn of the century. And the most unsettling detail, not a sound came from the soldiers' boots as they crossed the gravel path. Then, as the last figure passed, the entire column simply faded. That story, reported years later in local newspapers, became one of the earliest detailed accounts of what would come to be known as the Phantom Battle of Gettysburg. But it wasn't the last. Over the 20th century and into the present day, reports have continued to trickle in, many eerily similar. Travellers describing thick fogs that appear suddenly, then part to reveal scenes from another century. Tour guides who swear they've seen lights flickering in the old field hospitals long after everyone has gone home. Park rangers who avoid certain spots after dark, not because of danger, but because of something else, a presence, a feeling, a sense that the battle never quite left. What exactly are these experiences? Skeptics are quick to offer explanations. The power of suggestion, they argue, is strong on hallowed ground. The mind plays tricks in places soaked with historical emotion. Visitors immersed in the lore of Gettysburg are more likely to misinterpret shadows or faint sounds, mistaken identities, overactive imaginations, optical illusions brought on by fog and fatigue. And yet the consistency of the stories is difficult to dismiss entirely. Many accounts include specific details not widely known to the public. A reenactor in 1977 claimed to see a Confederate officer on horseback giving orders in what he later discovered was a direct quote from General Longstreet's actual battlefield command. A young girl visiting with her family in the 1920s described a man in blue helping her up after she tripped near the angle, only for her parents to find no one nearby and for the man to vanish in their photographs. Could so many unrelated individuals over such a long period be imagining the same things? Science offers one possible explanation, the theory of stone tape. Some paranormal researchers propose that emotionally charged events like a violent battle can imprint themselves onto the physical environment, much like a recording. Under certain conditions, these events may replay for sensitive observers, creating what appear to be ghostly apparitions or sounds. It's a fringe theory without empirical support, but one that aligns uncannily well with the patterns at Gettysburg. Then there's the question of ley lines, hypothetical alignments of spiritual or magnetic energy. Some believers suggest that Gettysburg sits at a powerful intersection of such lines, amplifying phenomena that would otherwise go unnoticed. Others offer a different view, that what's seen at Gettysburg isn't paranormal at all, but temporal, a glimpse perhaps through some kind of thin spot in time. Not spirits, but moments, not hauntings, but echoes caught in a loop briefly visible across centuries. And still, perhaps the most unsettling theory of all is the simplest, that the land remembers. What if a place soaked in such immense suffering never truly forgets? What if the very soil touched by the blood of thousands holds some kind of memory? Not conscious, not spectral, but something deeper, something that lingers in the folds of reality itself. The National Park Service does not formally acknowledge reports of paranormal activity. Their mission is history, not mystery. And yet, among rangers and long-time residents, the stories continue to pass quietly from one generation to the next. No matter where one falls, skeptic, believer, or somewhere in between, the Phantom Battle of Gettysburg endures not as a footnote or a campfire tale, but as a genuine enigma of American history, an intersection of the known and the unknown. So we must ask, can a battle truly end if it continues to be seen and heard and felt? Or does Gettysburg remain in some spectral way forever unfinished? Just as Gettysburg offers echoes of a battle long past preserved in mist and memory, the mysteries of the Civil War are not confined to land alone. Sometimes they surface from the depths, from beneath dark waters, where silence reigns and where answers remain in rust and silt. The harbour of Charleston, South Carolina glimmers under moonlight, its waters calm and still, but beneath this serene surface lies a theatre of experimentation, desperation and unresolved questions. For it was here, among shifting tides and wartime blockade lines, that the Confederacy turned to an unlikely weapon, the submarine. Most know the story of the H.L. Hunley, the Confederate submersible that made history in 1864 when it sank the USS Housatonic, becoming the first successful combat submarine in history. Yet even as researchers continue to study Hunley's final moments, another far more obscure tale lurks in the margins of Civil War lore, a shadowy operation, a vessel lost to time and an attack that may have never officially occurred. This is the mystery of the unknown Confederate submarine attack. It begins, oddly enough, with a whisper, an anecdote recorded in naval logs, survivor accounts, and obscure Confederate correspondence. Sometime in the spring of 1863, months before the Hunley's historic mission, a Union supply ship travelling near the mouth of the Mississippi River reported a strange underwater disturbance. The crewman described a sudden jolt below the hull, followed by a blast of compressed air and a metallic clang. No torpedo, no cannon fire, just a force from beneath. The vessel, unnamed in many of the reports, suffered minor damage, but its crew was rattled. Some believed they'd struck a mine. Others spoke of mechanical sabotage, but there were no known Confederate ships in the vicinity, no artillery range capable of striking them. The cause remained undetermined, filed away and forgotten, until similar incidents surfaced elsewhere. In late 1863, a Union gunboat stationed off the Georgia coast reported feeling as though it had been pushed upward from beneath. The crew feared a sandbar or hidden wreck, but the area had been charted extensively. divers sent to inspect the hall found a curious indentation, concave, narrow, and unnaturally smooth. No debris, no explanation. It was only years after the war, as the Hunley story became legend, that amateur historians began to revisit these early reports and ask a tantalizing question. Was there another Confederate submarine? Official Confederate records, fragmented and sparse, mention several experimental naval projects beyond the Hunley. Letters from Confederate Navy Secretary Stephen Mallory suggest that engineers in Louisiana and Texas had been working independently on submersible engines. One such letter describes a diving torpedo boat launched from a river facility near Shreveport. Its fate is unrecorded. A few surviving schematics, now housed in archival collections, depict crude cigar-shaped vessels, some powered by hand cranks, others using steam propulsion, an almost unthinkable feat for the time. One design even includes a pressurized compartment for a diver, suggesting an intent to deliver explosive charges directly beneath enemy hulls. But if any of these prototypes were completed, what happened to them? Mainstream historians remain cautious. There is no definitive proof, no physical remains, no confirmed battle record of a second operational Confederate submarine beyond the Hunley. The logistical challenges of building and deploying such craft, particularly in a war-torn and resource-starved Confederacy, were immense. Steam-powered submersibles in particular seem highly improbable given the technology of the 1860s, and yet the reports persist. In 1871, a fisherman near Biloxi, Mississippi, claimed to have dredged up part of a metal hull shaped like a whale riddled with rivets. He sold the scrap to a local blacksmith. No one thought much of it at the time. In 1880, a diver surveying wreckage near the mouth of the James River described an iron cylinder embedded in mud, too uniform to be natural, too degraded to be identified. Attempts to locate the site again failed. More recently, in the 1980s, sonar scans by amateur archaeologists picked up unusual shapes in the silt near the Gulf Coast. Shapes that resembled long, narrow vessels. Excitement built, but no full excavation was permitted, and the signals were eventually attributed to natural sediment formations. Perhaps if a second Confederate submarine did exist, and did strike at Union ships, why was it never acknowledged? Was it a rogue project, unauthorized and ultimately lost? Or was it so secretive, so experimental that even the Confederacy chose to erase its record after failure? There's also the possibility that the incidents weren't Confederate attacks at all, but something else. Unstable underwater munitions, unknown currents, faulty ship construction, wartime nerves, amplifying the ordinary into the extraordinary. But the pattern of reports, all concentrated in a narrow window between 1863 and 1864, suggests something more deliberate, something orchestrated. A few fringe theorists have even proposed that some Confederate engineers may have had access to blueprints or ideas far ahead of their time, perhaps obtained through espionage or foreign allies. One particularly curious letter uncovered in a private archive in France refers to American underwater craft being demonstrated before a group of European observers. The date, 1862. Could the Confederacy have received support or designs from foreign sources eager to see the Union weakened? If so, what became of that technology? Was it lost in the war or buried deliberately in the layers of history? As with so many Civil War enigmas, definitive answers remain just out of reach. The underwater world conceals as much as it reveals. In murky depths where visibility is limited and decay is relentless, even the remains of iron and steam can vanish with time. Yet the possibility lingers like a shadow in the tide. Was there another submarine that prowled beneath southern waters? Its name unknown, its fate undocumented, its crew long forgotten, and if so, might it still rest beneath the waves waiting to be discovered? Just as the forgotten submarine may still rest beneath murky waters, shrouded in silt and silence, so too do certain human stories lie buried, hidden not beneath the sea but behind bars, aliases, and masks. Our next mystery takes us away from the battlefield and into the secretive corridors of wartime intelligence, where one woman's identity was erased, concealed, and possibly sealed beneath iron. The old Capitol prison in Washington, D.C. stood as a bleak and imposing presence during the American Civil War. Once a meeting place for lawmakers, it had been transformed by necessity into a holding site for suspected spies, traitors, and enemy sympathizers. On thick sandstone walls, barred windows, and heavy doors echoed with secrets and silences alike. Among the many detainees that passed through its iron gates, there is one whose story continues to perplex historians and researchers. A mysterious woman held in complete isolation, whose name was never officially recorded, and whose face, some accounts claim, was hidden behind a metal mask. Could this truly be the Civil War's answer to the infamous man in the iron mask of French legend? And if so, who was she and what did she know? The official records are sparse, almost suspiciously so. According to a brief entry in the Union War Department's correspondence dated late 1864, a female operative was detained on suspicion of Confederate espionage. The note is cryptic, stating only that she was dangerous to the cause of the Union and must be kept from all communication. No name, no trial, no further documentation. After that, she vanishes from official history, but private journals and scattered witness accounts suggest more. One Union guard whose diary was discovered decades later in a New Hampshire attic describes being assigned to an unusual post at the old Capitol. He refers to a silent woman in solitary whose face he never saw. His orders were explicit: speak no words, receive no words. Meals were passed through a slot. Her cell was dark, far from the other inmates. Another account found in the letters of a nurse working in the prison infirmary tells of a woman with fine posture and unreadable eyes who may have been injured or drugged. The nurse writes that she tried to offer comfort, but was reprimanded by a Union officer and dismissed from her station shortly after. And then there is the legend that emerged years later that the woman wore a fitted metal mask, obscuring her identity completely. Is it possible? Could the Union have imprisoned a high-level female Confederate spy so dangerous, so potentially destabilizing that her identity had to be hidden, not only from the public, but from their own ranks? It may seem far-fetched, and yet the Civil War was no stranger to espionage, and certainly not to female spies. Figures like Rose O'Neal Greenhow and Belle Boyd are well documented. Women who charmed, manipulated, and infiltrated on behalf of the Confederacy. Greenhow herself was imprisoned in the very same old Capitol prison in 1861. But what if one spy went too far? What if she uncovered a secret so politically or militarily explosive that her mere survival threatened the balance of power? Some researchers believe the woman in the mask may have intercepted encrypted Union messages, possibly relating to troop movements or even internal divisions within Lincoln's own cabinet. Others suggest she was a double agent, initially working for the Union, but turning sides once she discovered something disturbing. And then there are the more fringe theories. One author writing in the 1920s claimed to have uncovered evidence that the masked woman was not Confederate at all, but a European operative embedded in Washington as part of a wider international intelligence network. This writer, whose work was never fully verified, described a series of intercepted letters allegedly written in French and encoded with advanced ciphers. Could foreign powers have been meddling in American affairs through a female agent whose presence had to be erased entirely? Still others entertain the notion that the woman wasn't imprisoned for what she did, but for who she was. A runaway from a powerful political family, a woman with ties to both Union generals and Confederate leaders, a witness to something no one wanted made public. Of course, there are skeptics. Some argue that the story of the masked woman is an embellished fusion of other prison tales, that references to a silent woman or mysterious detainee have been misinterpreted, that the mask, if it existed at all, was not of iron, but perhaps leather, or simply metaphorical, a way to express her forced anonymity. And yet even this possibility does little to diminish the unease that lingers around the case. Whether masked in iron or memory, her story represents a deliberate act of erasure. Someone wanted her forgotten. In 1888, a construction crew working near the old Capitol site unearthed a small cell beneath the existing foundation. Sealed, claustrophobic, with rusted hinges and no markings. Inside, they found only fragments of a cot and what appeared to be iron strapping. The discovery was never officially linked to any specific prisoner, and the chamber was quietly closed off again. Was it hers? Why does no comprehensive record of her imprisonment exist? What did she do or know that warranted such complete isolation? And if she died in custody, as some believe, why was her death not recorded? In the end, the tale of the female spy in the iron mask blurs the line between historical footnote and unsolved legend. It stands as a haunting reminder of the countless stories lost in war's shadows, lives unrecorded, truths half buried. And perhaps somewhere in an archive or a forgotten family letter, the answer still waits to be found. Who was the woman behind the mask? And what was so dangerous about her that history itself chose to forget? The embers of a city rarely speak, But Columbia, South Carolina still seems to whisper, even now walking its cobbled streets under the filtered golden haze of a late southern afternoon. You might catch the ghost of something more, something unsettled beneath the brick and stone. Shadows linger in corners where history refuses to resolve. On the night of February 17th, 1965, Columbia, the capital of the first state to secede from the Union, was consumed by fire. Towering flames devoured homes, businesses, churches, and libraries. The skies turned orange with smoke as the heart of the Confederacy's ideological rebellion was reduced to ash. But who lit the match? In the chaos of the Civil War's final months, Union Major General William Tecumseh Sherman led his infamous March to the Sea, a campaign of psychological warfare designed not only to the Confederate infrastructure but to break its will. By the time his troops reached Columbia, many feared what might come next. The Confederates had already begun retreating, leaving the city in disarray. Cotton bales were stacked in the streets. Whether for burning or storage, no one could say for certain. Rumours circulated. Spirits, both literal and alcoholic, flowed freely. And then, without clear warning, the fires began. Officially, Sherman denied any premeditated plan to burn Columbia. In dispatches, he blamed the Confederates for lighting the cotton ablaze as they fled. Others blamed the wind, drunk Union soldiers, or uncontrolled collateral damage from the occupation, but whispers persisted. Was there more to the story? A number of historians have noted a peculiar absence. The actual orders that would have governed Sherman's actions upon entering Columbia seem to be missing, or at least never clearly documented. Unlike many of Sherman's other military communications, there is no comprehensive directive outlining how the city should be treated, protected, or destroyed. It is as if the most pivotal moment in the city's history occurred in a vacuum, so what happened to the orders? One possibility is that no orders were ever given. Sherman, known for his methodical mind and ruthless tactics, may have left the decision ambiguous, allowing chaos to erupt organically, absolving him of direct responsibility. After all, plausible deniability is as old as war itself. But others point to something stranger. Shortly after the burning, rumours spread among Confederate officials that Union soldiers had been shown written instructions to set fire to key buildings, warehouses, munitions depots, and symbolic landmarks. A Confederate officer captured in the days following the blaze claimed to have overheard Union officers boasting of carrying out orders from headquarters to make Columbia remember this night forever. Yet if such orders existed, they vanished. Sherman, in his post-war memoirs, remained adamant that the destruction was. Still, some of his own men contradicted that claim. Union Captain Daniel Oakey, for instance, later wrote that the destruction of Columbia was inevitable, and that many soldiers viewed it as just retribution for South Carolina's role in starting the war. Could Sherman have authorized a burn and then erased the paper trail? There's another theory, one more speculative but haunting in its implications. It suggests that the orders were issued, perhaps verbally or in a quickly scribbled directive carried by courier, but were deliberately destroyed after the fact. One Union officer's journal entry from that night alludes cryptically to flames that serve a higher strategy than we're allowed to admit. Was Columbia a calculated example? A message to the Confederacy that surrender was the only path forward? Even more unsettling is the possibility that someone outside Sherman's immediate command took matters into their own hands. Rogue elements within the ranks, radicalized by the brutality of years-long war, might have decided to deliver a fiery judgment on their own. With hundreds of small units moving independently through the city, some drunk and bitter, accountability would have been difficult to enforce, especially if higher command chose to look the other way. Still others suggest the fire was simply the result of tragic coincidence. Cotton ignited by retreating Confederates, carried by high winds, scattered by drunken soldiers and careless flames. No orders, no conspiracy, just the ugly chaos of war. But even this explanation leaves gaps. The precise timeline of the fires remains disputed. Civilian accounts report Union soldiers actively fanning flames, even torching homes themselves. Some claim they witnessed men in uniform carrying oil-soaked torches and shouting that Columbia would burn before morning. Others described Union officers trying desperately to stop the destruction, only to find it already out of control. And what of the missing records? In the aftermath of the fire, a number of documents from Sherman's campaign headquarters were never recovered. Some were allegedly destroyed in transit. Others, it is claimed, were taken by officers as souvenirs or lost during chaotic retreats. A few may still rest in private collections, yellowed with age, hidden in trunks or drawers, never shared with the wider world. or perhaps someone ensured they would never be found. In a war filled with contradiction and complexity, the burning of Columbia stands as one of its most evocative enigmas. Did a calculated act of psychological warfare consume the city? Or was it the inevitable collapse of a collapsing regime? Was it a sanctioned strike cloaked in ambiguity, or a wildfire of vengeance fueled by confusion and rage? And perhaps the most compelling question of all, if a written order to burn Columbia did exist, who destroyed it, and why? Somewhere in the ashes of that February night, the truth may still smoulder, hidden beneath the stories we choose to tell and those we choose to forget. Somewhere in the rolling hills of Western Virginia, now softened by time and blanketed in wild laurel and pine, a narrow trail vanishes into the undergrowth. It's quiet here. Too quiet, some say. As wind filters through the trees, it carries with it the scent of moss, old stone, and something else, something harder to name. For those who know the story, these woods are more than picturesque. They're haunted by an absence, an entire regiment of Confederate soldiers that, according to some records, simply disappeared. The spring of 1864 was a desperate time for the Confederacy. General Ulysses Grant had begun his relentless overland campaign in the east. In the western reaches of Virginia, what would soon become West Virginia, smaller Confederate units were tasked with delaying Union advances, protecting supply routes, and disrupting northern infrastructure. Among them was the 13th Virginia Militia, led by the largely obscure but competent Colonel Jonathan Martin. Martin, a veteran of earlier skirmishes in the Shenandoah Valley, was given a modest command. Around 300 men, mostly local volunteers and conscripts. They were ordered to patrol and hold a narrow corridor of mountain passes near Greenbrier County, an area riddled with caves, creeks, and dense forest. Their mission: monitor Union troop movements and report back to headquarters in Staunton. But Colonel Martin's regiment never returned. According to Confederate dispatches, the unit was last seen on May 16, 1864, leaving a small encampment near Droop Mountain. They were well supplied, lightly burdened, and in good health. Scouts from a neighbouring unit reported that Martin's men headed southeast into the forest that stretched between Lewisburg and the New River Gorge. After that, there is silence. No survivors, no dispatches, no bodies, no signs of battle. It was as if they'd walked into the trees and vanished. Initial Confederate reports assumed an ambush. Perhaps Union cavalry had intercepted the regiment and quickly overpowered them, but Union records from the time show no mention of engagement in that area. In fact, Union forces were occupied elsewhere, some 30 miles to the north. No trophies were taken, no prisoners listed. A month later, an official Confederate inquiry opened into the matter, led by a captain, Elias Moorhead. He interviewed local residents, military witnesses, and scouts. All confirmed that the regiment had been in high spirits. They had not expected a fight that day. No one reported hearing gunfire. The few civilian accounts gathered, loggers and farm hands, only noted seeing smoke deep in the woods sometime after dusk, but no charred remains or wreckage were ever located. The official conclusion unit presumed lost, fate unknown. Over time, the disappearance of Colonel Martin's regiment became a footnote in Civil War history. With the collapse of the Confederacy the following year, its records were scattered or destroyed. Martin's name faded from prominence, but the strange nature of his unit's vanishing has invited deeper questions and more than a few theories. The most immediate and conventional explanation is desertion. As the war dragged on, morale in remote Confederate regiments waned. It's possible that Martin, sensing the inevitable Confederate defeat, made a quiet decision to disband and scatter his men into the surrounding countryside, perhaps instructing them to melt into civilian life, return home, or escape westward. But this theory fails to explain why no one, not even family members, ever reported seeing the men again. No letters, no returnees, just emptiness. Another theory suggests they may have gotten lost in the rugged terrain, strayed too far from mapped paths, and succumbed to the elements. The Appalachian forests can be deceptive. Fog settles in thick waves. Landmarks disappear, rivers change course, but again, no skeletal remains or supplies have ever been found. Not a single belt buckle, rifle or dog tag. Despite later searches by Confederate sympathizers, Union scouts, and even curious locals in the decades that followed, in the early 20th century, local legend took root. According to folklore recorded in 1923 by the Greenbrier Historical Society, a group of hunters claimed to stumble upon a moss-covered stone circle deep in the woods, surrounded by rusted bayonets, weathered but still upright, as if ceremonially placed. Others spoke of hearing distant drum beats echoing through the hills at night, even when no one was there. A former pastor from Lewisburg, writing in 1937, swore he once met an old man living in a cave who claimed to be one of Martin's soldiers, aged, wild-eyed, and speaking of voices in the fog that lured the regiment away from their path. Speculative certainly, but such stories persist. In more recent decades, amateur historians and Civil War enthusiasts have conducted searches using metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and drone surveys. A few scattered relics have surfaced. Buttons, buckles, a rusted canteen, but nothing definitively linked to the 13th Virginia Militia. Some suggest that Martin's regiment may have stumbled into one of the many limestone cave systems in the area, possibly using it as shelter or a hidden passage. Could a cave collapse have buried them forever, sealing their fate in stone? And then there are the more fringe ideas. One theory originating in a 1981 article from a regional folklore journal suggests that Martin's men encountered something unnatural. Strange lights in the forest or a hidden cult operating in the hollows preying on travellers. The article cites Native American legends of the Whispering Woods, a place where entire hunting parties were said to vanish centuries before white settlers arrived. Another proposition is rooted in espionage. What if Martin had been approached by Union agents? Could he have switched sides, leading his men into captivity willingly under a false flag? But if so, why did none of them reappear under new names? Why no records in Union prisons? It's tempting to dismiss the mystery as wartime confusion, poor record-keeping, or myth-building in the years after the conflict. And yet, there remains something chilling about a regiment of over 300 men simply vanishing without struggle, without witness, without trace. Who was Colonel Jonathan Martin really? Why was his regiment operating alone in such an isolated area? And what, if anything, might still lie hidden in those Appalachian woods, waiting to be found, or perhaps to stay forever forgotten? Sometimes the silence tells us more than the words ever could. In a quiet corner of Spring Hill, Tennessee, where moss clings to brick and trees seem to lean in as if listening, there once stood a modest two-story home, the final headquarters of Confederate General Earl Van Dornen. Today, the structure is known more for its ghost stories than its history. But beneath the creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper lies a deeper mystery, one that historians have yet to solve. What happened to General Van Dornen's personal papers? On May 7, 1863, Van Dorn was shot in the back of the head in his own quarters, allegedly by Dr. George Peters, a local physician and jealous husband who accused the general of carrying on an affair with his wife Jessie. Peters claimed it was a crime of passion. He did not flee. He turned himself in and curiously was never punished. But even as the Confederacy reeled from the sudden loss of one of its most colourful and controversial commanders, another question quietly emerged. What became of the documents Van Dorn had compiled? Van Dorn was not just a cavalry general. He was an obsessive note-taker, a prolific writer of letters, and some believe a man who kept sensitive information close to his chest. Reports suggest that at the time of his death, his quarters contained several trunks filled with correspondence, campaign maps, encryption keys, diplomatic communiques, and personal journals, some of which may have held explosive insights into the Confederate High Command and its intelligence operations. Yet when his effects were catalogued by Confederate officers days later, those trunks were nowhere to be found. Why? One Confederate staff officer, Lieutenant Colonel Haskins, noted in a letter to his wife that the room had been swept clean by the time investigators arrived. Another, Major Elbert Conklin, wrote of papers burned hastily in the fireplace on the evening of the murder. But who did the burning? Peters had no access to the house after the shooting. Could someone else have arrived before authorities? Perhaps with a motive not of revenge but of secrecy. The possibilities range from the mundane to the deeply unsettling. One explanation is simple. Confederate superiors may have removed the documents themselves to prevent scandal. Van Dornen, though competent in the field, was no stranger to controversy. His reputation was marred by rumours of affairs and insubordination. It's possible that higher command saw his personal papers as a liability. Burning them would have been the cleanest solution. But if this were so, why are there no records of such an order? Why was there no official Confederate report detailing the disposition of his belongings? A more complex theory suggests espionage. Van Dorn operated in a region crawling with Union sympathizers and spies. Union intelligence had been eager to intercept Confederate communications from central Tennessee, especially in the weeks leading up to the Vicksburg campaign. Could Van Dorn's murder have been more than personal vengeance? Some researchers point to gaps in Dr. Peters' story. He was never tried, never even arrested. His connections to local Unionist families were quietly documented, but never pursued. Was he working under orders, or at least protected by someone with influence? If Union agents did orchestrate or benefit from the murder, they may have spirited the papers away before Confederate investigators could secure them. In that case, the missing documents might have been used to undermine Confederate strategy, or quietly archived in Northern War records that remain untouched to this day. Other more speculative theories suggest that the missing papers contained secrets so sensitive that neither side wanted them known. Some claim Van Dorn was investigating internal corruption within the Confederate quartermaster system, a network of bribery and theft that sapped desperately needed supplies from Southern armies. His personal letters, if preserved, might have named names. Others believe he had stumbled upon evidence of secret negotiations between Southern elites and European powers, or even covert communications between Confederate officers and Northern industrialists seeking to profit from both sides of the war. In 1891, nearly 30 years after the murder, a box labelled VDC Spring Hill surfaced in a private archive in Louisville, Kentucky. The box was empty. In the decades since, Civil War historians and archivists have combed through estate sales, family collections, and forgotten trunks in Southern attics, always hoping, never quite finding. Occasionally, letters in Van Dornen's handwriting do appear in private collections, usually brief and mundane, but nothing approaching a full record of his final months has ever emerged. It's as though someone somewhere ensured that the trail would remain cold. And so we are left with a troubling silence. A murdered general, a killer who walked free, and a collection of documents that may or may not have held the answers to questions we've long forgotten to ask. Did Van Dorn die simply for his indiscretions, or was he silenced to protect something larger, more dangerous than a scandal? Who stood to gain from his death and from the disappearance of the records he left behind? In war, the victors are said to write the history, but in this case the pages were taken before anyone could read them, and perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. Not what was written in those papers, but the quiet, deliberate care with which they were made to disappear. The sun sets slowly over the rolling fields of Fredericksburg, Virginia, casting long shadows across the open plain once soaked in blood. At Marie's Heights, a low stone wall still stands, its worn stone silent witnesses to one of the most lopsided and tragic moments of the American Civil War. The air here is still almost reverent, as if the earth itself remembers the cries, the chaos, and the quiet acts of mercy that followed. It was December 13th, 1862. Union troops, wave after wave, charged the fortified Confederate position at Top Marye's Heights. Nearly 8,000 Union soldiers fell before they ever reached the stone wall. Many within, yards of the Confederate muskets that cut them down. The field was carpeted with bodies, and as night fell, so did a bitter cold. From behind the Confederate lines, a young South Carolinian named Richard Rowland Kirkland looked out across the devastation. He was only 19 years old, but what he saw was more than the faceless enemy. He saw suffering. He heard the cries for water, for help, for something, anything to break the agony of those long, frigid hours. Then, according to accounts first recorded years after the war, Kirkland approached his commanding officer, General Joseph Kershaw, and made a request that still echoes through time: permission to cross the wall and aid the wounded. At first, Kershaw refused. It would be suicide to venture into no man's land with Union guns watching. But eventually the general relented on the condition that Kirkland take no white flag. What happened next has become part of Civil War legend. Kirkland climbed the wall unarmed and walked into the field of the fallen. Carrying canteens filled with water, he knelt beside man after man, offering comfort, lifting heads, adjusting coats against the wind. For nearly an hour, Confederate guns held their fire. Union sharpshooters too reportedly ceased shooting once they realized what was happening. It is said that a quiet awe settled over the battlefield, broken only by the moans of the dying and the soft steps of a teenager moving from soldier to soldier. Eventually, Kirkland returned to the wall, sat down and wept. This moment, the Angel of Marye's Heights, as he came to be known, has become a powerful symbol of compassion in the midst of war's cruelty. A statue now stands in Fredericksburg, honouring that act of humanity. It depicts Kirkland cradling a fallen soldier, a canteen in hand. But like many stories passed down through generations, the line between fact and myth begins to blur under scrutiny. Historians agree that Richard Kirkland was indeed present at Fredericksburg. They agree he served under Kershaw and was known for his courage. They confirm that he died the following year in the Battle of Chickamauga at the age of 20. But beyond that, the story becomes murkier. The first published account of Kirkland's mercy came nearly 2 decades after the battle from General Kershaw himself. It appeared in the Charleston News and Courier in 1880. No contemporary military reports from 1862 mention the incident. No Union diaries or letters from survivors reference a lone Confederate crossing the battlefield with water. Could the silence be a reflection of the chaos? Or was it a story reconstructed in hindsight, an attempt to humanize a conflict that had torn the nation apart? Some scholars suggest that Kershaw, writing in the post-Reconstruction era, may have been motivated to present Southern soldiers as noble and chivalrous in the face of defeat. Others argue that oral testimonies from local civilians and Confederate comrades support the story's core details, even if they were not documented at the time. But what if the mystery lies not in whether the event happened, but in why it continues to resonate? Why does the tale of the Angel of Mares Heights endure when so many battlefield stories have been lost? Why does this one act, one young man moving against the grain of hatred and fear, hold such power over the imagination? There are more speculative theories too, quietly discussed but rarely printed. Some suggest Kirkland may not have been the only one who crossed the line that night. Could others have followed his example, their stories swallowed by the fog of war? Were there unnamed Union soldiers who crawled toward the wall not to fight, but to find solace in the arms of a stranger? Even stranger whispers emerge from local folklore. Decades after the war, visitors to Maries Heights reported hearing footsteps pacing across the field after dusk, the sound of metal canteens clinking, or the soft murmurs of a voice no one could quite place. The area is considered by some to be haunted, not by ghosts of vengeance but by a presence of peace, a phantom of mercy, a figure offering water to the dying long after the cannons fell silent. Of course, these are stories told in hushed tones. Skeptics dismiss them as imagination, as tricks of wind and memory. But even so, many who walk the ground of Fredericksburg feel something, a stillness that's different, a weight not of grief but of awe. Whether Richard Kirkland's act unfolded exactly as later remembered, or whether it has grown into a parable for something deeper, the mystery remains. Why do we hold on to this one story? Why does this single gesture of empathy on a field otherwise drenched in horror feel more real than any official record? And if the records were never written, how many other such stories are lost to time? What acts of compassion, of defense against cruelty, have been forgotten simply because no one thought to write them down? Or perhaps someone did, and their papers, like so many Civil War secrets, simply vanished, waiting perhaps in an attic, a forgotten archive, or the quiet memory of a town like Fredericksburg. We may never know the full truth of the Angel of Mars Heights, but in the mystery itself, there is a strange kind of light, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, humanity has a way of stepping forward softly, bravely, without a flag. And sometimes the most enduring mystery isn't whether it happened, but how such grace can survive at all in the shadow of war. The Chesapeake Bay in the early spring of 1864 is a place of striking contrast. Pale morning fog drapes over the water like a shroud, blurring the distant outlines of gunboats and merchant ships. Along the quiet wards of Old Point Comfort in Virginia's Tidewater region, the usual hum of military logistics carries on. Barrels rolled, orders shouted, telegraphs ticking like nervous fingers drumming on a table. But beneath this, normally something strange is stirring. Quiet movements, whispered messages, and a single carriage waiting in the early dawn light. Its destination is unknown, so is its purpose. This place, Old Point Comfort, sat on a fault line between war and diplomacy, just north of the Confederate capital and well within the reach of Union command. It was a place where armies gathered, but also where letters travelled swiftly and secrets could pass undetected. It is here, historians believe, that something extraordinary may have taken place. A clandestine meeting between agents of the North and the South, not for strategy or surrender, but for peace. The secret peace mission of 1864 is one of the Civil War's most peculiar and quietly contested episodes. It doesn't appear in most textbooks. Few official documents confirm it. Yet traces of it emerge like fingerprints in soft wax, faint but impossible to ignore. At the heart of this mystery is a trio of Confederate envoys, James P. Holcomb, Jacob Thompson, and Clement Clay, who travelled to Canada in early 1864. Ostensibly they were there to coordinate with Southern sympathisers in exile. But behind the scenes, a more delicate effort may have been underway. Their presence in Niagara Falls, a neutral zone safely distant from battlefields, coincided with a surprising surge in back-channel communications, many of which passed through Old Point Comfort and Washington, D.C. That spring, a series of letters, known only to a handful of insiders, began circulating between President Lincoln's inner circle and Confederate intermediaries. These letters were filled with cautious coded language. They never explicitly proposed peace, but they danced around the idea. Could there be terms? Would reunification be considered if slavery were preserved or perhaps gradually dismantled? Was it even possible, as the war entered its fourth brutal year, to imagine a negotiated end? By July of that year, something unexpected occurred. A prominent New York newspaper published a letter, allegedly written by Lincoln himself, offering a peace meeting upon the single condition that the Union be preserved. The authenticity of that letter has been debated ever since. Lincoln never publicly acknowledged it, but within days another cryptic meeting was arranged, this time in Niagara Falls itself, and again Clement Clay was involved. But who sent him? Clay would later claim that he acted with the blessing of Jefferson Davis. Davis, however, denied this, insisting that any offer not involving Confederate independence was unacceptable. Could it be then that Confederate diplomats were acting without direct approval, or that Davis, desperate but unwilling to appear weak, allowed talks to proceed in secret, knowing they would be disavowed if discovered? On the Union side, matters were equally murky. Historian William C. Harris argues that Lincoln may have used these talks more as political theatre to demonstrate to a war-weary public that he was willing to entertain peace, but only on his terms. Others suggest that Secretary of State William Seward may have conducted negotiations without the president's full knowledge, exploring back channels through unofficial envoys like Horace Glay or Colonel Martin Delaney. And then there's the matter of the sealed dispatches. Multiple references appear in Northern and Southern correspondence to sealed letters carried between Washington, D.C. and the Union-held coastal fortresses of Virginia. Some were addressed to unknown recipients, others disappeared entirely. In one case, a Union general reported the presence of a civilian delegation passing through Fort Monroe under military escort. Their names were never recorded. Their mission was never explained. Who were these men and what exactly were they discussing? There are inevitably more speculative theories. Some suggest that foreign diplomats, possibly from Britain or France, were present in these negotiations, hoping to broker an end to the war and stabilise trade in cotton and grain. Others point to the sudden emergence of gold-backed loans arranged in Montreal and London around this same time. Loans that mysteriously dried up when talks collapsed later that summer. And then the mission disappears from the record. By late 1864, Sherman had taken Atlanta. Lincoln had secured re-election, and the Confederacy was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own shortages. Peace, if ever truly on the table, was swept away in the tide of Union victories. But the questions remain: why did both governments allow, perhaps even orchestrate, talks they would later deny? Why were documents hidden, envoys unnamed, and letters left unsigned? Was the entire episode a miscommunication, a political ploy, or a genuine but doomed effort to end the bloodshed early? Some researchers argue that the answer lies in archives still untouched. Buried correspondence and Canadian diplomatic records, personal diaries passed down in Southern families, misfiled memos lost in federal collections during the chaos of Reconstruction. A few tantalising fragments have emerged over the years: a hotel ledger in Toronto with Clay's signature, a Union ledger noting confidential guests near Fort Monroe. But the full story remains elusive. More provocatively, a 1937 interview with a retired naval officer described transporting non-combatants with diplomatic protections from Washington to the coast during the summer of 1864. He remembered them only as the gentleman in grey. No names, no destination, only a single comment stuck with him. If this goes well, it could all be over by Christmas. It wasn't. And yet, even now, we're left to wonder, how close did America come to ending its deadliest war? Not with surrender, but with a handshake. Was the secret peace mission of 1864 a failure of politics, or a success hidden by history? And if so many hands worked so carefully to erase it, what exactly were they trying to hide? At twilight, the dense woods of northern Georgia whisper with an eerie silence. Chickamauga Creek moves slowly, almost deliberately, through a land marked by violence. The trees stand tall, but their trunks bear scars, jagged from musket fire, and charred from cannon blasts that once shook the earth beneath them. The air here seems heavier, still touched by the echoes of thousands of men who clashed, bled, and died in these woods in September 1863. Locals say the battlefield never truly rests, and some claim that not all of its soldiers ever left. The Battle of Chickamauga was one of the Civil War's bloodiest engagements, a two-day conflict that left over 34,000 casualties strewn across forests and fields. It marked the first major Confederate victory in the Western Theater after the fall of Vicksburg, and it would forever stain the land around the Tennessee-Georgia border with trauma and grief. Yet beyond the historical record and tactical analysis lies a tale that does not appear in official reports, a tale whispered by centuries past between veterans and guarded carefully by the people who live in the shadow of the battlefield. They call it the Ghost Regiment of Chickamauga. The first reports surfaced shortly after the battle itself. Union patrols returning to the site to recover bodies and bury the dead began describing strange occurrences. Men in blue uniforms would vanish into the mist, then fail to return. Others reported hearing the sound of marching boots, steady, deliberate when no other troops were present. In one case, a gravedigger swore he saw a full company of Confederate soldiers standing silently just beyond the tree line at dusk. They did not speak, they did not move, and when approached they dissolved like smoke. At first, these were dismissed as hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and trauma. The emotional weight of Chickamauga, combined with its dense terrain and poor visibility, created an environment ripe for misperception. But the stories didn't stop. Over the decades that followed, similar accounts would reach the surface. During the Spanish-American War, soldiers stationed nearby claimed to hear disembodied voices at night. In the 1930s, a WPA worker compiling battlefield oral histories reported that elderly locals still left offerings of tobacco and bread at a particular grove near Snodgrass Hill, a tradition they said dated back to the haunted regiment. Even modern park rangers at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park have quietly admitted to unusual experiences. Footsteps with no source, phantom drums at dawn, and flickering lantern lights weaving through areas long closed to visitors. The most compelling and widely debated encounter comes from 1905. That year, a visiting scholar from Emory University named Augustus Grayson claimed to have witnessed what he described as an entire formation of infantry, clothed in ragged grey and armed as in the style of 1863, marching in perfect silence across an open field before fading into the morning fog. Dr. Grayson, not a spiritualist or folklorist by trade, published a short report in a regional historical journal. He insisted on the sincerity of what he saw. Skeptics, however, quickly dismissed it as atmospheric illusion, misremembered drill reenactments, or the projection of deep reading into traumatic spaces. But what if there's more? Among the most chilling aspects of the Ghost Regiment stories is their consistency. Descriptions remain remarkably similar across generations: grey uniforms stained with blood and dust, blank expressions, and formations that seem rehearsed, almost mechanical. The soldiers are never hostile, but neither do they interact. They appear only at dawn or dusk, most often near the Brotherton cabin and the trails that lead toward Horseshoe Ridge, precisely where the fiercest fighting occurred. Historically, that area saw the near destruction of Union General George Thomas's lines, a moment only salvaged by his last stand defense that earned him the title the Rock of Chickamauga. Could the phantom troops be Confederate? If so, are they the remnants of Longstreet's attacking column caught forever in the moment before their triumph turned to tragedy? Another theory suggests something stranger. Some believe the Ghost Regiment isn't a reenactment of past events, but a premonition, a vision of a battle not yet fought or of soldiers not from our own timeline. In fringe circles, this has led to speculation about temporal echoes, battlefield trauma becoming trapped in the landscape like magnetic tape, replaying again and again under just the right conditions. Still others draw parallels to ancient folklore. Across the world, from the hills of Scotland to the forests of Japan, tales persist of phantom armies, entire battalions doomed to march eternally for crimes known only to history? Is Chickamauga simply another site where blood, memory and nature have conspired to create a liminal space, a place where time is thin? There are even suggestions, though unprovable, that Confederate General Braxton Bragg himself may have written of an unshakable sense of presence when visiting the field months after the battle. But those letters, if they existed, are now lost, and so the stories continue. Tourists walking alone down the wooded trails near dusk sometimes report a strange stillness, as if the birds have stopped singing and the wind has died. More than one visitor has claimed to hear the soft rattle of canteens and cartridge boxes just over the next rise, only to find no one there. Others speak of a lone soldier standing near a monument, watching silently before vanishing as if he'd never been. None of this appears in the official guidebooks. Even today, if you ask the local guides, many will smile politely and say there are no ghosts at Chickamauga. But if you ask the right guide, an old one, someone whose grandfather fought in the war, or whose family has lived on this land for generations, you might get a different answer. A slow nod, a pause, and then perhaps a single sentence. They still march, they never stopped. But what is it that binds them here, to this place, to this story? Is it duty, regret, or something more elusive? An unresolved memory echoing through the pines? And if one regiment lingers, unseen by most and unaccounted for by history, how many others might be out there, waiting, watching, still marching? The wind moves strangely on Pea Patch Island. It whistles through the thick, salt-stained walls of Fort Delaware like a voice half-remembered. The structure itself is massive, grey, fortress-like, and imposing, rising from the marshes of the Delaware River like a memory cast in stone. On the surface, it appears deserted, frozen in time. But step closer, and you'll notice the quiet details. Rusted shackles still bolted to brick, staircases that spiral into darkness, and iron doors that seem far too heavy for any modern use. Officially, Fort Delaware was a Union stronghold, defensive fortification turned Civil War prison. Between 1862 and 1865, it housed nearly 30,000 Confederate prisoners of war. The fort was cold, damp, and overcrowded, surrounded by waters difficult to cross and guarded by the thick walls and heavy guns. Records describe disease running rampant, food in short supply, and guards struggling to maintain order among the growing number of detainees. But according to some accounts, rare, fragmented, and often cloaked in rumour, there was more to Fort Delaware than its official narrative lets on. Hidden beneath its visible chambers beyond what today's tours and history books mention, may have existed a deeper, darker level, a subterranean prison, one not listed on the fort's blueprints. And if that's true, what happened there? The first mentions of a lower prison appeared in the letters of Confederate officer William Stone, who was briefly held at Fort Delaware before being transferred to Johnson's Island. In a letter to his wife dated August 1864, he wrote cryptically, "They have moved several men, officers they say, below, not to the lower casemates, but beneath even that, it's a place not on the maps, we hear nothing of them afterward." At the time, his wording was dismissed as exaggeration or metaphor, language shaped by fear and the psychological strain of imprisonment. But over the next several decades, similar references emerged. A Union clerk stationed at the fort near the end of the war described hearing the same rumours. In his journal recovered from a family attic in the 1930s, he wrote, "There is talk among the guards of the vault, a chamber sealed by iron beyond the cistern steps. Men say it was used for interrogation or for traitors too dangerous to hold with the rest. I have never seen it, but I know men who have, and they do not speak of it again." So what was this place? Did it ever exist? Modern historians point to inconsistencies in Fort Delaware's architectural plans. Blueprints from 1861, before its conversion to a prison, list 4 major underground chambers for water storage and ammunition. Later diagrams after the war appear to omit one of these entirely. Some argue this was simply an error in redrawing the layouts. Others believe it was intentional. Adding to the mystery is the testimony of a civilian conservation corps worker from the 30s who claimed to have uncovered a bricked-up tunnel while helping with structural repairs beneath the fort. According to his written statement archived at a local historical society, the tunnel sloped downward, then sharply left. It led to a sealed chamber reinforced with iron and silent as a tomb. He was reportedly ordered by his supervisor to reseal the area and not speak of it again. The military has never acknowledged the existence of such a chamber. Still, the rumours persist. Some believe the secret prison was a black site detention area for Confederate spies, particularly those believed to have sensitive knowledge or connections to foreign agents. During the later years of the war, when fears of British or French involvement loomed, Washington's paranoia about espionage ran high. Could Fort Delaware have been used for unauthorized interrogations outside the purview of the War Department? Others whisper of more macabre purposes. Certain fringe theories suggest the underground area may have been an experimental confinement zone where prisoners were subjected to isolation, psychological manipulation, or worse. There is no direct evidence to support these claims, but anecdotal fragments remain. References to men emerging from below, changed and silent, or guards refusing to take shifts near the old cistern steps after nightfall. And then there are the ghost stories. Visitors and staff alike have reported unusual occurrences in the lower chambers. Sudden drops in temperature, the sound of pacing footsteps in empty corridors, voices crying faintly from behind sealed doors. Some even claim to have seen shadows moving across the walls, shadows without a source. Skeptics are quick to point out that Fort Delaware is old, drafty, and prone to natural acoustic illusions. Cold spots can be explained by the layout of the stone walls, creaks and whispers, just the building settling, or perhaps the power of suggestion. But what about the documents, the missing blueprint chamber, the bricked-up tunnels? If there was nothing to hide, why seal the evidence? In recent years, calls for a full archaeological survey of the fort's lower levels have grown louder. Preservationists and historians alike have requested ground-penetrating radar and structural mapping, hoping to either confirm or debunk once and for all the idea of a hidden prison beneath the surface. Thus far, permissions have been slow, funding is slower still. And yet, even in the absence of definitive proof, the mystery continues to capture the imagination. What might still lie beneath Peapatch Island, sealed in the cold earth, guarded by layers of stone and silence? Were men held there in secret, forgotten? Or were these simply the inventions of weary minds trying to make sense of horrors no one wished to write down? Is the legend of the secret prison a story built from gaps in history, or a truth that has yet to be uncovered? And if it is true, what else might the walls of Fort Delaware still be hiding? The iron tracks stretch across the Georgia countryside, weaving through pine forests and low hills, silent now but once alive with urgency, smoke and thunder. Along this corridor between Atlanta and Chattanooga, history rushed forward on steel wheels driven by steam and sabotage. And at the heart of it all was a train named the General, and a mystery that continues to confound historians. Who was the unknown saboteur whose actions nearly changed the course of the Civil War and then vanished from the record? The Great Locomotive Chase, also known as Andrews Raid, is one of the most daring episodes of espionage and sabotage in Civil War history. On the morning of April 12, 1862, Union volunteers led by civilian scout James J. Andrews hijacked a Confederate locomotive in Big Shanty, Georgia, with the aim of wreaking havoc on the Western and Atlantic Railroad. Their goal was simple in theory, yet bold in execution, to cut Confederate supply lines by destroying track, bridges and telegraph wires as they headed north. The mission failed. The raiders were pursued relentlessly by Southern forces captured, and several, including Andrews, were hanged as spies. Others later escaped or were exchanged, their stories preserved in Union records and memoirs. But in the haze of historical detail, one figure appears only in glimpses: an unnamed saboteur, possibly Confederate or rogue Unionist, who allegedly tampered with the rails and telegraphs before Andrews ever boarded the train. Was he a double agent, a local Confederate sympathizer with knowledge of the plan, or something else entirely? Official records of the raid, including Confederate dispatches and post-war testimony, make mention of sabotage along the route that neither side could fully explain. Telegraph lines that had already been severed before Andrews' men reached them. A stretch of track near Moon Station reportedly loosened days before the raid. And most puzzling of all, a second man in civilian clothes reportedly spotted inside the telegraph office in Marietta shortly before the raid. An individual no one could later identify. This man, described as tall, dressed in black and speaking with a northern accent, was said to be carrying a satchel and a stack of telegraph orders. He entered the office, asked a few questions about line status, and then departed quietly. Hours later, that same telegraph line mysteriously went dark before the raiders even approached. Who was he? Some early investigators suspected he was a member of Andrews' team who'd gone ahead to scout the route, but among the raiders who were captured, none matched the description, and no one admitted to such a role. The official list of raiders includes no man unaccounted for. Others believed he might have been a Confederate loyalist who, having heard rumours of a Union plot, took it upon himself to interfere or perhaps mislead. But even the Confederate command at the time appeared puzzled with reports indicating anomalous telegraph failure and evidence of interference not by our own. A third, more speculative theory emerged decades later that the man may have been a mercenary or freelance operative, someone hired independently by an unknown party to either help or hinder the raid, depending on which account believes. What motive would such a figure have? Was he attempting to aid the raiders, softening their path ahead of time? Or was he a disinformation agent, creating chaos and confusion to derail the mission? Some conspiracy-minded researchers have suggested that he may have been a northern abolitionist operating outside military channels, part of a loosely connected underground network of spies and saboteurs who believed the official Union leadership was moving too slowly against slavery. Others argue that he might have been a Confederate infiltrator, playing both sides to sabotage the Union's covert operations. Strangely, a handful of Union documents recovered in the 1890s from the personal effects of a former War Department clerk reference an unnamed non-military auxiliary who may have acted in excess of authority during the Georgia diversion. The memo is unsigned and the auxiliary is never identified. Could this be the same man? The mystery deepens when examining post-war recollections from residents of Big Shanty. One elderly woman interviewed by a local journalist in 1898 claimed her father had seen a man not in uniform near the tracks 2 nights before the raid. He was carrying a lantern, she said, and seemed to be measuring or marking something along the rail ties. Her father assumed he was a railway worker, but after the raid, no such worker was ever accounted for. And then silence. No arrest, no further sightings, no grave. The saboteur, if he ever existed, left no name behind. Modern historians remain divided. Some suggest the entire figure may be apocryphal, born from misremembered sightings and the fog of war. Others argue that the consistency of multiple unrelated accounts suggests someone was there, acting alone or as part of a shadowy network. As with many Civil War mysteries, time has smudged the lines between fact and legend. The Great Locomotive Chase remains one of the war's most dramatic episodes, but also perhaps one of its most misunderstood. Because if a lone saboteur truly helped shape or hinder that raid, then a key part of the story has yet to be told. Who was the man in the telegraph office? Why was he there before the Union raiders arrived? Was he a forgotten hero, a silent betrayer, or something else entirely? And if we still don't know who helped or hindered one of the boldest missions of the war, what else might remain hidden along those forgotten tracks? The tracks glistened beneath the pale April sky. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle once echoed, sombre and low, along those steel veins. From Washington to Springfield, a funeral train moved slowly city to city, watched by millions in silence and sorrow. Draped in black bunting and accompanied by armed guards, the train bore not just the body of Abraham Lincoln, but a burden of national grief. It was called the Lincoln Special, a 12-car train commissioned to carry the slain president on his final journey. Departing Washington, D.C. on April 21, 1865, it retraced part of the route Lincoln had taken to assume the presidency just 4 years earlier. This time, though, it stopped forestry processions in Baltimore, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, New York City, Albany, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Chicago before arriving in Springfield, Illinois. Every detail was planned, every minute scheduled, every car accounted for, or so it seemed. Among the many official records prepared for the journey, one key document has never been found: the full and final manifest of the Lincoln Special. The manifest, essentially a detailed accounting of the personnel, cargo, and contents aboard each car, should exist in multiple copies, yet none have surfaced. No definitive list of who or what travelled the entire length of the journey has ever been verified. Why? Manifests were standard procedure for any military or ceremonial transport in the 1860s, especially one of such national significance. There would have been personnel logs, cargo sheets, route plans, and telegraph reports filed at each stop. And yet, when researchers examine the surviving documents from the Lincoln funeral train, they find gaps, sometimes minor, sometimes strange. Some records mention only 9 cars, others list 12. In New York, eyewitnesses spoke of a mysterious locked car guarded by federal troops, not on any public document. In Cleveland, a military officer allegedly demanded an extra passenger be added to the train at the last minute, then later denied having issued the order. More curiously, multiple towns along the route reported seeing unidentified men in plain clothes enter, and exit the train. Some claimed they were Pinkerton detectives. Others believed they were War Department operatives, perhaps transporting sensitive cargo or protecting something more than just the president's remains. What could possibly be so secret? Let's start with what is known. The president's body was housed in a special hearse car, beautifully adorned and marked with crape and flags. A second coffin containing the remains of his son Willie, who had died in 1862, was also on board to be buried alongside his father. Military escorts, medical staff, clergy and members of the press made up much of the known personnel. But beyond that, questions multiply. Historian Lloyd Lewis noted as early as the 1930s that the train's personnel logs do not match between various cities. Some names disappear after Harrisburg. Others appear for the first time in Chicago. Several of Lincoln's former bodyguards reportedly travelled with the train, but only 2 are recorded officially, and at least one man claiming to be part of the crew in later years. James Sullivan of Ohio was never verified by any government record. Could it be a simple clerical failure? After all, the nation was still in shock. The assassination and the rapid arrest of John Wilkes Booth's co-conspirators and the simultaneous end of the war had thrown Washington into chaos. Paperwork was lost, files misplaced. It's a plausible explanation. But some historians believe the gaps may point to something more deliberate. One persistent theory suggests that the Lincoln Special may have carried classified documents or even Confederate materials captured in the final weeks of the war. Rumours circulated in 1865 that Jefferson Davis's personal papers were found by Union forces and quietly transferred to the Capitol. Could some of these have been smuggled aboard the funeral train protected under military secrecy? Another more speculative theory claims the train may have carried the body of a second unnamed individual tied to the Lincoln assassination plot. Though lacking strong documentary support, the idea resurfaced in 1995 after a private collector revealed a faded telegram referencing a second coffin placed aboard the train in Baltimore under guard. Most scholars assume this refers to Willie Lincoln, but the telegram does not use his name and was curiously filed from a now demolished military depot, rather than a funeral home or station. Then there's the strangest report of all. In 1906, a retired railman named Elias de Vere claimed he had seen the Lincoln Special pass through Dunkirk, New York, not part of its official route. On a night when the train was supposedly miles away in Albany, he swore that the train bore all the markings of the funeral convoy, yet moved silently and made no stop. His family dismissed the tale, but within a few years, other railroaders began to echo similar ghostly sightings, giving rise to the legend of Lincoln's phantom train. A spectral reenactment that some say appears each April along forgotten tracks. Folklore aside, the real mystery remains rooted in what should be the most basic of documents. A list, a manifest, a simple accounting of who and what rode that iron-bound procession from morning to memory. Why is it missing? Was it lost to time like so many Civil War papers? Or was it never meant to be preserved? And if someone wanted it gone, what were they trying to hide? Even today, Lincoln scholars occasionally return to this riddle. They comb through telegraph archives, newspaper reports, and private diaries searching for the elusive full picture of that final journey. Each time they get close, the trail fades, leaving only rumours, partial records, and the cold whisper of steel on track. What was aboard the funeral train that we were never meant to know? And in hence, the nation's hour of deepest mourning, who else besides the fallen president was truly riding in silence towards Springfield? As Lincoln's funeral train crept westward through grief-stricken towns, the railways it traversed stood in stark contrast to another far more secretive route that had crisscrossed the American landscape just years before. It was a route that had no timers, no tickets, and no published maps, and yet it functioned with extraordinary precision. Known as the Underground Railroad, this vast network of escape pathways helped thousands flee slavery, guided not by machinery or steel, but by whispers, symbols, and perhaps by maps hidden in plain sight. In a small farmhouse attic in Auburn, New York, nestled in the creases of a faded quilt, researchers once found a scrap of parchment. It was old, its edges browned and crumbling, its ink nearly bled into the fibres. What it showed, if indeed it showed anything at all, was a strange pattern. Curving lines, intersecting triangles, and what looked like rows of tiny circles. Was it a child's doodle, a map, or something else entirely? That attic belonged to Harriet Tubman. The woman remembered as the Moses of her people, Tubman led dozens of enslaved men, women, and children to freedom along the Underground Railroad. Born into bondage in Maryland, she escaped north in 1849, only to return again and again, risking her life to guide others to safety. She could not read or write, yet she outwitted bounty hunters, patrols, and the immense machinery of slavery for over a decade. Her navigational instincts were legendary, but how did she do it? According to official histories, Tubman relied on oral communication, star positions, natural landmarks, and the trusted aid of abolitionist allies. There is little to no record of her using maps, and yet rumours persist. Some scholars point to cryptic objects discovered among Tubman's personal effects: threaded bead necklaces with colour patterns, hand-stitched quilts bearing odd geometric motifs, and that enigmatic parchment from the attic. Others recall oral histories passed down through black communities in Pennsylvania and Delaware, stories of the Moses woman who carried tiny maps stitched into the seams of her skirts or carved with a fingernail onto pieces of birch bark. One tantalising clue comes from a diary entry written in 1860 by William Still, a key Underground Railroad operative in Philadelphia. In it, he mentions a remarkable token from Miss Tubman, a cipher of routes through Kent and Dorchester counties, marked in her own hand by means of soft soot and crushed berries. The original document has not been found. If Tubman did use maps, how did she conceal them? And who helped her design such a system? Among fringe theories is the idea that Tubman collaborated with skilled choreographers sympathetic to the abolitionist cause, possibly free black sailors or Quaker surveyors who shared knowledge of terrain, backdrops, and safe houses. There's also speculation about a link to Masonic symbolism. Some of the quilt patterns associated with Tubman's circles, like the flying geese and drunkard's path, bear striking similarity to cryptographic methods used by secret societies of the 19th century. Quilt codes themselves have been hotly debated by historians. The popular narrative that quilts were used to signal routes, warnings, or safe houses gained widespread attention in the late 20th century, but the academic consensus remains cautious. Some say there was not enough primary evidence. Others argue that oral traditions, especially those passed through generations of African-Americans, deserve greater weight in historical discourse. Could Tubman have developed her own symbolic language, one that blended African cultural memory with survivalist innovation? There are references to spirit language used by enslaved people, visual signs passed from plantation to plantation, like stacked stones, broken branches, or chalk markings. Perhaps Tubman won these methods into a larger system. After all, she is known to have carried a pistol, a small pouch of herbs, and a collection of coins, items not just for survival, but possibly for communication or negotiation. Could a hand-drawn cipher or textile map have been among them? And then there's the matter of the Canadian border. After the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, Tubman increasingly guided escapees all the way to Canada, often into Ontario. There she worked with black communities in St. Catharines and Toronto. Some local archives contain curious notations on the margins of church registers and baptismal records. Tiny marks and arrows often written in graphite, sometimes in faint ochre ink. Are these mere clerical notations or remnants of something more coded? In 2007, a researcher studying 19th century Canadian abolitionist writings came across a weathered envelope tucked inside an old Bible. It contained a tiny folded scrap of cotton cloth roughly 3 inches square. On it, faint blue ink sketched what looked like a line connecting small X marks across what appeared to be a stylized version of Lake Erie and its surrounding towns. The cloth bore no names, no date, no author, but the Bible belonged to a known associate of Tubman. Coincidence, or part of a vanished cartographic language? And yet, Tubman herself never spoke of maps, at least not in the way we understand them. In interviews late in life, she often attributed her uncanny sense of direction to divine guidance. "I listened to the voice of God," she told one journalist. "He told me where to go." That phrase, dismissed by some as metaphor or religious zeal, takes on deeper resonance when one considers the environment in which she operated. For someone unable to read the white man's papers or navigate by traditional documents, listening may have been her own way of describing a mastery of signs, sounds, and visual cues beyond easy explanation. Was that voice she followed a memory of passed down? Roots? A whispered code, a felt sense of direction shaped by years of experience? Or was it something more elusive, something encoded in symbols, threads, and scraps of parchment. We may never know the full truth. The trails Tubman left behind are partial, like the map she may or may not have carried. Still, the mystery endures. How did one woman alone in enemy territory guide so many to freedom without a traceable map? And if such a map ever existed, could it still be out there, tucked inside a drawer, folded into the lining of a coat, or buried beneath the floorboards of a safe house long forgotten? What secrets might still be hidden in the seams of history? As we step away from the hidden paths and silent codes of Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad, another figure of quiet determination emerges from the fog of Civil War history. Where Tubman moved in the shadows, this woman often stood at the centre of chaos, on battlefields, in makeshift hospitals, and in the halls of post-war bureaucracy. Her name was Clara Barton. To most, she is remembered as the founder of the American Red Cross, the angel of the battlefield. But behind the polished narrative lies a quieter, more haunting enigma, one marked not by what she wrote, but by what has vanished, her missing letters. In a modest brick building nestled on a quiet Washington, D.C. street, now a National Historic Site, visitors can walk through the rooms where Barton once lived and worked. Her handwriting still graces some of the documents preserved there. Her meticulous filing cabinets remain here. During the final years of the Civil War and the chaotic reconstruction that followed, Barton established the Office of Missing Soldiers, determined to identify and locate the tens of thousands of Union men whose fates remained unknown. In just 4 years, she received and responded to more than 63,000 letters, pleas from mothers, wives and brothers desperate for news of their loved ones. The office successfully helped identify over 22,000 missing soldiers. Barton's records were comprehensive, thorough, and by all accounts obsessive in their detail. She kept copies of her outgoing correspondence. She saved every fragment of information. So why then are dozens, perhaps hundreds of her personal and professional letters now missing? The mystery begins subtly. In 1881, after founding the American Red Cross, Barton sought to write a comprehensive memoir. She gathered her materials, correspondence, wartime journals, newspaper clippings, and yet several key communications were absent. Letters she remembered writing to government officials, replies she was certain she had received from grieving families, and most curiously, a set of documents relating to Andersonville Prison, one of the war's most notorious Confederate camps. Barton had personally travelled to the ruins of Andersonville in 1865, assisting in the identification of Union dead and working alongside former prisoner Dorrance Atwater, who had secretly compiled a death list under the noses of his Confederate captives. Together, they erected markers for nearly 13,000 graves. It was a deeply emotional mission, and one Barton considered central to her life's work. Yet several letters between Barton and Atwater are now unaccounted for. Their contents are known only through fleeting references in later correspondence. Were these documents lost to time, misplaced in the shuffle of an office that spanned war zones and multiple relocations, or were they deliberately removed? In 1945, while organising wartime archives for donation to the Library of Congress, researchers discovered several storage boxes labelled simply private. Inside were many of Barton's early letters, faded and brittle, but not all of them. An accompanying inventory list, likely penned by Barton herself, detailed several documents that were no longer there. Among the most notable, a letter supposedly sent to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, detailing observed irregularities in the handling of certain battlefield burials. Another addressed to a known Union general hinted at systemic failures in prisoner exchanges and possible interference by third parties. The originals of these letters have never surfaced, and neither have the responses. Some speculate the missing letters contained accusations that could have embarrassed the War Department or certain generals. Others suggest Barton, who was no stranger to political battles and personal rivalries, may have been selectively censored, either by officials during her lifetime or by later archivists hoping to preserve her legacy as purely humanitarian. But the theories do not end with bureaucratic red tape. A more fringe perspective proposes that Barton, like Tubman, may have been privy to knowledge the public was never meant to know. Was she aware of hidden burial sites that were later quietly erased from maps? Did she uncover patterns of disease, neglect, or even experimentation in certain field hospitals? One missing letter, rumoured to have been addressed to President Lincoln himself, reportedly contained concerns about the treatment of wounded black soldiers at a specific Union encampment in Tennessee. While no record of such a letter exists, its alleged content has circulated in the oral histories of Civil War descendants for over a century. Adding to the enigma is the curious case of Clara Barton's housekeeper, a woman named Frances H. Gage, not to be confused with the famous abolitionist of the same name. In a short diary entry from 1884, Gage writes cryptically about burning the unwanted files as instructed and securing the room before the gentleman arrived. The meaning remains unclear. Was Barton attempting to safeguard personal details, or was she responding to pressure from unknown figures? In 1973, a fire in the National Personnel Records Centre destroyed countless Civil War-era documents, compounding the mystery. While not directly tied to Barton's archives, the blaze ensured that some of the missing puzzle pieces may never be recovered. Even today, researchers occasionally stumble across Barton's lost letters, wedged between the pages of old ledgers, tucked inside private collections, or mistakenly catalogued under other names. Each new find adds to the picture, but also deepens the questions. Why would someone, either in Barton's era or later, intentionally erase parts of her correspondence? Was it simply to streamline her image as a heroic figure? Or to prevent the surfacing of darker truths buried in the aftermath of war? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, what might we still be missing? Clara Barton once wrote, "You must never think of anything except the need and how to meet it. But what if some needs, some truths were deliberately left unmet? What if entire chapters of Civil War history were quietly folded away, excised not by accident, but by design?" As we trace the faint ink of her surviving letters, we're left to wonder how much of Barton's story remains untold, scattered across attics, mislabeled in archives, or perhaps still waiting to be uncovered in the margins of history. As we leave behind the scattered fragments of Clara Barton's correspondence, the silence of lost words lingers. In the age of handwritten letters and fragile wartime records, what else might have vanished into obscurity? Or more intriguingly, what remains but refuses to reveal its meaning? Near the banks of the Rappahannock River, on a stretch of Virginia land once scorched by battle, local folklore tells of a Union scout found dead beneath a collapsed pine tree. The year was 1863. The area, dense woodland just south of Fredericksburg, had recently witnessed waves of bloodshed during the Chancellorsville campaign. His body, discovered days after heavy shelling, was severely decomposed, his uniform barely distinguishable. Yet clutched tightly in his stiffened hand was a leather pouch. Inside were several small sheets of paper, folded, stained, and covered in tightly packed writing, only not in any known readable form. To modern eyes, they resemble little more than smudged glyphs. But to those who examined them at the time, officers, clerks, even cipher experts, there was something oddly deliberate about the symbols. A pattern perhaps, a code. The pouch and its contents were reportedly sent to Washington, then silence. That might have been the end of the story, a wartime footnote buried under decades of official paperwork until a single reference appeared in a forgotten journal. In 1889, a retired Union colonel named Ambrose Glay published a collection of wartime recollections under the title Shadows Along the PTOAC. The book, largely anecdotal and lightly edited, contained one especially curious entry. In the spring of '63, a body was found near Banks Ford carrying what we believe to be encrypted correspondence. I recall General Hooker remarking half to himself, "If that boy got through, the war might have taken a different turn. The papers, damned unreadable things, were sent to the Cipher Bureau. I never saw them again." The Cipher Bureau, a loosely organised department under the Union's Military Telegraph Corps, was responsible for encoding and decoding battlefield messages. Headed by Anson Stagger, and operating in close coordination with Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, it functioned in secrecy. Most of its records were destroyed or lost after the war, and those that remain make no mention of the dead messenger or the strange symbols found in his possession. For decades, this incident was regarded as apocryphal, a tale stitched together from unreliable memories. But in 1937, during a routine renovation at a storage building on the grounds of the old War Department in Washington, a locked iron strongbox was unearthed behind a false wall. Inside were crumbling folders and packets of aged paper, many too damaged to read. Among them was a slip of paper bearing an inventory list. At the bottom, specimen papers, a Paranormal case, 1863, code unsigned, status unresolved. The list was dated July 3, 1865. This rediscovery reignited interest in the long-forgotten messenger. Were the papers inside the strong box the same as those found near Banks Ford, or had they been copies? Several of the documents were transferred to the National Archives. At least one set of them, the most legible, was studied by cryptologists during World War II and again in the 1970s by the NSA under a declassification review of historical American ciphers. To this day, they remain undercoded. The symbols are written in tight rows, sometimes in spirals, sometimes in irregular blocks. Letters and numbers intermingle with what appear to be invented glyphs, some vaguely resembling shorthand hands, others like nothing in known American or European cipher systems of the era. No key has ever been found. No other documents in the Union or Confederate archives contain similar writing. Several theories have emerged. One suggests the messenger was a courier for the Union's own Black Dispatches, the network of African-American spies and scouts working behind enemy lines. The use of unconventional code might have been designed to mask high-risk intelligence, possibly involving Confederate troop movements or even internal dissent in Southern Command. Another theory posits that the messenger was not Union at all, but a Confederate double agent. Some researchers note that the papers include references to certain rail depots and telegraph lines that would have held more strategic value to the south than to the north. Then there are the stranger theories. In a privately published manuscript from 1998, amateur historian Lyle Eddings has speculated that the papers were not military orders at all, but rather a kind of cipher diary, a record of covert communications between unnamed officers, possibly connected to assassination plots or early plans for Confederate exile routes should the war be lost. Eddings even suggested the cipher might have been inspired by Freemasonic or Rosicrucian symbolism, noting several repeating symbols that resemble esoteric diagrams. More recently, in 2014, a team of digital historians and codebreakers from Georgetown University attempted to feed the symbols through machine learning algorithms trained on 19th century encryption systems. The result, inconclusive patterns were detected, but no decipherable language emerged. So, we return to the messenger himself. Still unnamed, still without context, no service records matched his description. No unit claimed him. His grave, marked simply as Unknown Union Scout, lies in Fredericksburg National Cemetery, and we are left to wonder what message died with him. Was he carrying critical intelligence that might have changed the course of a battle or even the war itself? Was his code simply too advanced for its time, or was it never meant to be understood at all? Merely a decoy, a cipher for a cipher, hiding something deeper beneath. And perhaps the most haunting question, are there more messages like his hidden away in private trunks, sealed in the basement, or already destroyed, lost threads in a vast web of forgotten wartime intelligence? The dead cannot speak, but sometimes they leave behind voices scrolled in cipher, waiting for someone someday to finally listen. As cryptic symbols fade into the silence of unsolved codes, the Civil War leaves us with other kinds of puzzles, ones not etched in ink, but buried in the soil. Some mysteries are not encrypted. They are human, flesh and bone, unnamed and undocumented. And yet their stories press against the veil of history asking to be seen. Sharpsburg, Maryland, a quiet place today. The town seems suspended in time, flanked by rolling hills and veiled in morning mist. But in September 1862, the earth here trembled under the weight of iron and blood. The Battle of Antietam, America's bloodiest single day, left more than 22,000 soldiers dead, wounded, or missing. For hours, the cornfield, the Westwoods, and Bloody Lane became names seared into the national memory. It was among the dead, days after the guns fell silent, that a discovery sparked whispers, then questions. Near the sunken road, Union burial crews stumbled upon the body of a Confederate soldier. His uniform was torn, the insignia muddied, his features obscured by blood and dust. As they prepared the body for interment, one of the men, so the story goes, paused. The angle of the shoulders, the shape of the jaw, something felt different. Further inspection revealed something extraordinary. The soldier was not a man. This account appears in a dispatch written weeks after the battle by Clara Barton herself in correspondence to a colleague. They found among the enemy's fallen a woman dressed and armed as a man. Whether by devotion or desperation, she had taken up arms. Her name was unknown. This brief mention was nearly lost, buried among Barton's many notes. But it was not the only record. A Union chaplain named William R. Easton, serving in the aftermath of Antietam, recorded in his personal journal. In the row laid west of the lane, a body was found belonging to a Reb by uniform. She had been shot clean through the chest. The lads who found her wept. They gave her a separate grave. The identity of this woman, this soldier, remains unknown. No photograph, no personal effects, no letter bearing a name, only speculation. We know, of course, that women served in disguise during the Civil War on both sides. Historians estimate that as many as 400 women posed as men to fight. They cut their hair, bound their chests, and assumed male names. Some did it to be near husbands or brothers, others for money or belief in the cause, still others perhaps to escape the boundaries of the world they were born into. But most of these women were discovered eventually through injury, illness, or accident. Their identities were revealed. Many were discharged quietly, a few even honoured. But the woman at Antietam was not discovered until death. Who was she? Some believe she may have been Rosetta Wakakeman, a young woman from New York who fought under the alias Lyons Wakakeman in the Union Army. But Rosetta survived Antietam and died later of dysentery in 1804. Others point to legends from southern counties, stories of daughters who disappeared only to be whispered about in later years as having gone to war. One theory, never confirmed, claims she might have been part of the 1st Louisiana Infantry, a regiment known for being among the earliest to engage at the Sunken Road. Military records from Confederate units were notoriously spotty, and many rosters were incomplete. If she enlisted under a false name, as was common, the paper trail would be almost impossible to follow. Then there are the more speculative accounts. In 1913, at the 50th anniversary reunion at Gettysburg, an elderly man who had fought at Antietam claimed in an interview that he once heard of a woman sharpshooter who died at the lane taking down 6 boys before she fell. There is no way to verify this. Memory, as decades pass, has a way of shaping legend from fragments, but the idea persists. Was she merely a private soldier or something more? A courier? A spy? Did someone know her secret, perhaps even protect it? In the early 2000s, an amateur historian working with ground-penetrating radar near the Sunken Road discovered an unmarked grave slightly apart from the others. With the permission of the National Park Service, a limited excavation was performed. What they found was inconclusive. A partial skeleton, badly deteriorated, no clear indications of gender, no artifacts. Could it have been her? Or had time erased the last trace? One haunting possibility lingers in quiet corners of Civil War scholarship, that she was never meant to be found, that her death and even her burial were concealed by comrades to protect her identity, perhaps even her family. In letters written by Confederate soldiers after the war, rare phrases appear that may hint at these hidden stories. The brave one who wore our coat but not our name, or simply she walked beside us but not as she was. What compelled her to fight? Was it loyalty, love, vengeance, or something else entirely? Something more personal, more painful? We may never know. No marker bears her name. No diary has surfaced to speak in her voice, and yet something of her remains in the soil of Antietam, where corn once grew tall and rifle smoke settled like fog. Perhaps she was just one among many. Perhaps there are others buried under borrowed names and incorrect uniforms. And if so, what does that say about how many voices history has yet to count? In the end, we are left with the image of a soldier fallen, anonymous but not forgotten. Her secret was kept in silence. Her story is perhaps still waiting beneath the dust. And we must ask, how many more stand like shadows at the edge of our memory, never fully seen, never fully heard? As we step away from the battlefield and the silence of unmarked graves, we turn now to a different kind of Civil War mystery. One born not in bloodshed, but in the quiet furnished rooms of a house that once stood at the centre of a nation divided. Richmond, Virginia. On the corner of East Clay and 12th Street, the tall, stately building rises with an air of faded elegance. 3 stories high, painted a pale grey-white, and framed by wrought iron balconies, this is the Confederate White House, the executive mansion of Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America. Today, it is a museum. Inside, visitors walk polished hallways past preserved drawing rooms and velvet-cushioned parlours. Oil portraits stare silently from the walls. Furniture rests in the exact places they once occupied. But despite its outward appearance of preservation and order, something is missing, or rather many things. What exactly was inside the Confederate White House at the time of its evacuation in April 1865? On the night of April 2nd, with Union forces closing in on Richmond, Jefferson Davis received word that the capital must be abandoned immediately. By dawn, he and his cabinet had fled aboard a southbound train, beginning the short-lived flight of the Confederate government. Fires broke out across the city, some intentionally set to prevent the capture of military resources, and in the chaos, the White House was left behind. When Union troops arrived, they found the mansion largely intact. But official records from the period, both Confederate and Union, present conflicting accounts of what had been removed, what had been left, and what may have simply vanished. We know that personal items were taken. Davis himself packed important documents and some valuables. His wife Verena reportedly took family jewellery and several letters. Yet reports from Union officers arriving at the scene describe a strange emptiness. Rooms appeared undisturbed and yet curiously bare. Chests had been opened. The cabinets were empty. Some furniture had been removed selectively. One Union officer described a scent as a house not looted, but intentionally stripped. What had been taken and why? The Confederate government during its final months had become increasingly secretive. Paper trails grew sparse. Some believed that the house may have held more than domestic furnishings and portraits. Could it have been used to store sensitive documents, maps, cipher books, or even diplomatic correspondence never meant to see the light of day? One of the most intriguing rumours surrounds the so-called Iron Chest Papers, mentioned only in a handful of Confederate letters and never recovered. These documents were believed by some historians to contain communications between Richmond and European agents, possibly even relating to potential foreign recognition of the Confederacy. If such papers existed, they could have rewritten much of what we know about Confederate diplomacy, but no trace of them has ever surfaced. More puzzling still are the tales of certain artefacts, items allegedly housed within the mansion during the war, but absent when Union forces arrived. A ceremonial Confederate seal reportedly commissioned for use in foreign negotiations. A gold inkwell is said to have belonged to General Robert E. Lee, gifted to the president after the victory at Fredericksburg, and most notably a small locked box kept in Davis's private study, described by his personal secretary as carved of Cuban mahogany, sealed in brass and always kept near his hand. None of these items have ever been found. Mainstream historians are quick to point out that such objects may never have existed, or may have been quietly removed by Davis's staff and later lost or sold during the family's post-war exile. The confusion, they argue, stems from the trauma of the war's end and the scarcity of reliable documentation. But other theories persist. One, more speculative, suggests that as Davis fled Richmond, he ordered certain contents of the White House secretly buried or hidden to prevent their capture by Union forces. Confederate loyalists, fearing both military defeat and legal retribution, may have taken pains to conceal symbols of the Southern government, hoping one day to restore them. Some even draw tenuous connections between these missing contents and the infamous lost Confederate gold, suggesting that what vanished from the White House may have travelled south, hidden aboard the same trains carrying the last Confederate Treasury reserves. In the decades following the war, stories circulated of Southern families who claimed to possess items from the president's house. A woman in South Carolina reportedly displayed a velvet footstool said to have come from Davis's parlour. In Louisiana, an elderly man insisted he once saw a Confederate desk hidden in a barn loft, but none of these claims could be proven. In the early 20th century, when the Confederate White House was restored as a museum, curators began a painstaking process of gathering furniture and artefacts associated with the Davis family. Many original items were recovered. Some were donated by descendants, others were replaced with period-appropriate replicas, but gaps remain. Entire rooms, such as the family dining room and the children's nursery, lack confirmed original furnishings. No confirmed inventory exists from the days before the evacuation, and the elusive mahogany box, whatever it held, has never been documented beyond a handful of secondary accounts. Could the missing contents of the Confederate White House still exist, tucked away in attics, mislabeled in private collections, or buried in sealed trunks beneath Southern soil? Could lost papers, documents that might shed light on Confederate strategies, alliances, or secrets, still be waiting to be found? Or was it all a myth, a trick of time, memory, and longing? History has a way of solidifying stories in stone, but sometimes beneath the surface the truth shifts like dust through open fingers. And so we return to Richmond, to that quiet, pale house that once bore the weight of a fledgling nation's dreams. Its rooms are calm now, but in the empty spaces, something lingers, and we are left to wonder what secrets were carried out through its doors that night in April 1865. What truths disappeared between the walls, and might they ever return? As we leave the quiet halls of Richmond's presidential mansion with its lingering ghosts and vanished artifacts, we turn to a question far older than the fall of the Confederacy, one that pulses beneath every chapter of Civil War history. not how it ended, but how and why it truly began. A grey morning hangs over Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The waters are still heavy with fog. In the distance, the silhouette of Fort Sumter rises from the sea like the spine of a forgotten shipwreck. Here, on April 12, 1861, the first shots of the Civil War rang out. Cannon fire from Confederate batteries hammering a Federal garrison into surrender. Textbooks often mark this moment as the official start of the war. But historians have long debated a deeper truth. What or who truly instigated the conflict? The conventional answer is straightforward. A clash between irreconcilable visions, a union opposed to the expansion of slavery, and a confederacy bent on preserving its economic and social order. Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, the secession of 11 southern states, and rising tensions across the fractured nation. All these elements created a chain reaction that led inevitably to war. But as with so many moments in history, inevitability is a dangerous illusion. Beneath the surface of these well-documented events lies a current of uncertainty. What if the war wasn't as spontaneous or as reactionary as we've been led to believe? What if it was encouraged or even orchestrated by forces with motives far more complex than states' rights or abolition? We begin with a little known document, a letter dated February 1861, discovered decades later in a private estate in Connecticut. It's unsigned, addressed only to the Honourable One, and written in cryptic, cautious language. It speaks of division as necessity, of agitation applied where unity fears, and concludes ominously, "Let the first stone be cast, where the wind will carry the echo farthest." Its authenticity is debated. No recipient has been identified, but the timing is uncanny. The letter predates the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter by just weeks and hints at a premeditated interest in igniting conflict. Who wrote it and why? Some historians have pointed to industrialists in the North, figures whose financial empires were built not only on manufacturing, but also on war itself. Could they have seen civil conflict as a way to boost the economy, secure federal contracts, and reshape the power structure of the country? Others look abroad. In the 1850s and early 1860s, European powers were watching America with great interest. Britain in particular had strong economic ties to southern cotton. France under Napoleon III had ambitions in Mexico. Some researchers speculate, though with little hard proof, that foreign agents may have worked behind the scenes to destabilise the Union, making it easier to expand influence in the Western Hemisphere. Still, others ask a more disturbing question. Could certain figures within the US government itself have fanned the flames, believing that only a war could complete the nation's transformation or purification? It's here that we encounter the mysterious figure of the orator. His real name is unknown, but according to several mid-19th century correspondences, newspaper editorials, diaries, and political pamphlets, a travelling speaker moved throughout border states in 1859 and 1860, delivering fiery anonymous lectures that inflamed secessionist sentiment. He never gave his full name, used multiple aliases, and seemed to disappear as quickly as he arrived. Some believed he was an agent provocateur hired to incite violence. Others claimed he was simply an eccentric abolitionist, stirring fear among slaveholding populations. No one ever found him or proved he existed at all, yet, in town after town, weeks after one of his appearances, votes for secession mysteriously surged. More curious still is the resurfacing of this same pattern in official records. In Arkansas, Georgia, and Mississippi, rapid spikes in militia recruitment appeared just after similar untraceable speeches were reported. Is this coincidence or careful orchestration? Moving even further into the realm of speculation, there are fringe theories, rarely embraced by mainstream scholars, but persistent nonetheless, that suggest secret societies may have had a hand in steering the country toward war. Masonic lodges, Knights of the Golden Circle, and other clandestine groups appear repeatedly in Civil War lore. Some claim they sought to create a slave empire, stretching into Central America. Others suggest their goal was to destroy the federal system altogether, replacing it with a new form of governance ruled by elites. Evidence is scant but tantalizing. One 1860s-era cipher discovered etched into the underside of a courthouse desk in Kentucky appears to reference a meeting between KGC officers and northern financiers. Was it a hoax, an elaborate prank by a local teenagers, or something more? At the heart of these theories, whether grounded in fact or not, is a shared assumption that the Civil War, like so many historic upheavals, may have been less spontaneous than it seemed. Could the spark have come from a hidden match? Could the forces that set America ablaze have been working from behind velvet curtains, financial ledgers, or coded letters? Or was the conflict simply the result of a slow, smouldering crisis reaching its inevitable breaking point? In the end, the official record tells us one version of how the Civil War began, but between the lines of political speeches and newspaper headlines, a quieter question lingers, one not easily answered by timelines or treaties. What if the true instigator of the Civil War was not a person or even an ideology, but a pattern? A convergence of ambition, fear, misinformation, and manipulation? And if so, how close did we come to never knowing it? Or worse, how close are we even now to repeating it? And while we continue to ask who may have lit the fuse that sparked America's deadliest war, there are some whose names and stories were never even recorded at all. On a quiet slope above the Potomac River, the marble walks of Arlington National Cemetery stretches toward the horizon, in perfect somber rows. The air is hushed here, even when the wind stirs the leaves. Every stone has a name, every grave, a rank, a regiment, a date of death except for one. Beneath a solitary white sarcophagus, guarded day and night, lies the tomb of the unknown soldier. Today, it is known as a national symbol, honouring unidentified American service members lost in battle. But few realise that this tradition, this sacred site, has roots that reach back to the Civil War and to a mystery that has never been fully resolved. Just beyond the iconic tomb, nestled into the older section of Arlington's sprawling grounds, lies a less visited part of the cemetery. Here among the oldest graves, one stone stands out. Not for its grandeur, but for its complete lack of identity. The marker simply reads, "Unknown US soldier died 1862. There is no regiment, no birthplace, not even a known battlefield. And while thousands of Civil War dead remain unnamed due to the chaos and rudimentary recording of the era, this particular grave has long drawn the attention of historians, archivists, and even cryptographers. Because according to fragmented records, oral accounts, and one weathered ledger recovered in 1915 from a DC church basement, this soldier was not buried here by chance. The entry in the ledger is brief but chilling. It reads, "Body recovered along PTOIC banks, uniform partially burned, no identification, note pinned beneath collar, let silence guard his truth." The note has never been recovered. It is not referenced in any other known military document. No photograph of it survives. Only the line in the ledger written in spidery ink over 50 years after the war began suggests it ever existed. Who was this man? And why would someone leave a message cryptic, poetic, and seemingly deliberate on the body of a fallen soldier? At first glance, the simplest answer is most likely. During the Civil War, uniforms were often the only means of identifying the dead. Dog tags didn't exist. Soldiers stitched their names into their coats or carried notes in their pockets. Many who fell were buried in mass graves or never recovered at all. But this case doesn't quite fit that pattern. The man was found alone, not on a battlefield, but on a riverbank in a place that had seen no major engagement. His uniform bore signs of fire, localized, not widespread, as though someone had attempted to obscure its markings, and the phrase reportedly found with him, "Let silence guard his truth," feels less like mourning and more like a message. From there, speculation begins. One theory suggests the soldier was a Union deserter who had changed sides, or attempted to. Perhaps he had been discovered in the act, punished unofficially by his comrades or enemies, and left to die without ceremony. The note in that interpretation might be a warning or an apology. Others believe the man was not a soldier at all, but a courier, possibly carrying sensitive information. His uniform might have been a disguise, his death the result of a message intercepted. Some versions of this theory claim he was a spy, caught between allegiances. If so, who did he work for, and what secrets died with him? In recent years, a more fringe theory has emerged, drawn from the surviving testimony of a former gravedigger who worked at Arlington in the early 1900s. His notes uncovered in a family collection in 2004 mention an old-timer who pointed out the grave of the unknown Civil War soldier and whispered, "That man, he was never meant to be found." Could the unknown soldier have been someone significant? Someone whose identity, if revealed, might have caused controversy, even scandal? A few researchers have suggested the man could have been connected to high-ranking Union or Confederate leadership, perhaps even a relative of someone prominent, killed under circumstances that had to be concealed. Without DNA, Without records, there is no way to know. Attempts to locate the body for testing have been consistently denied out of respect for the sanctity of the grave, a decision widely supported by veterans groups and historians alike. Yet, this respectful silence has also preserved the mystery. Then there's the matter of the tomb's location. The grave sits only a short distance from the Arlington house, once the home of Robert E. Lee. It is no accident that the National Cemetery was established here on land confiscated from Lee's family. But some researchers have noted that this specific grave faces a narrow path, one that during Lee's time led down toward the river and was used by messengers and servants moving between camps and docks. Is it mere coincidence that this nameless body was buried near a former Confederate general's estate along a messenger's route and with a cryptic note allegedly tucked into his collar? Or is this proximity an echo of some long-forgotten decision? An intentional act by someone who wanted this man remembered, even if not identified? As we walk these quiet rows at Arlington, where honour is etched in marble and silence speaks louder than any inscription, one cannot help but pause at the unknown soldier's grave from 1862. Not the one with guards and ceremony, but the one without a name, without visitors, without answers. Who was he? What was his truth? And why, after more than 160 years, does it still feel like someone somewhere wanted us not to know? If the unknown soldier's grave reminds us of what war can hide, then what happened next in Richmond shows us how much can be erased entirely. Richmond, Virginia, April 2nd, 1865. Night falls heavy across the city, smoke curls along the eaves of buildings, rising like silent phantoms into the black sky. Fires are spreading, first in the armories, then in the warehouses, then further, faster, hungrily devouring the heart of the Confederate capital. The streets glow red. Gunpowder stores detonate in the distance like muffled thunder. And among the infernos, inside government buildings and office basement, bundles of parchment and sealed crates are fed into the flames. Confederate officials fleeing before advancing Union troops have begun to destroy the documentary soul of their government. What was lost that night? What, or perhaps who, were they trying to conceal? The evacuation of Richmond marks one of the final dramatic turns of the American Civil War. With General Lee's defenses collapsing and Union forces under Ulysses Grant pressing in, Confederate leaders abandoned the capital in haste. President Jefferson Davis and his cabinet fled by train, leaving behind a city in chaos. But before they left, orders were given, direct and deliberate, to burn records. Some of these documents were clearly strategic in nature. War plans, cipher logs, financial ledgers showing the remaining contents of a collapsing treasury. These would have been dangerous if they fell into enemy hands. But among the flames, something stranger happened. Eyewitnesses, both Confederate and civilian, later described seeing clerks and officers carrying non-military files into the fires. Tax rolls, private letters, prison logs, and even personal correspondence of officials burned not in neat stacks, but in frenzied handfuls, as if time were running out and the contents too sensitive for capture. Some Union soldiers entering Richmond in the days that followed remarked that the ruins of offices were strewn with half-burned fragments, tiny scraps. A few have survived, fragile slips of paper found in gutters or ash piles preserved by wind or accident. One such fragment, recovered in 1865 by a Union quartermaster and now housed at the Library of Congress, contains only a few legible words. Shipment from Galveston. Do not register under the War Department held by J.D. personally. Who or what was not to be registered? And why would such an order come from Jefferson Davis himself? Another remnant, reportedly from the Confederate Post Office, references detained messages from Northern sympathizers. The rest is charred and unreadable. Why would personal letters from Northern citizens, perhaps Unionists or spies, have been in Richmond at all? Were these intercepted, stored as blackmail, or perhaps protected? And then there's the question of the missing prison records. Libby Prison, Castle Thunder, and Belle Isle, three of the Confederacy's most notorious wartime detention centres, were known for their harsh conditions and inconsistent accounting. After the war, Union investigators found large gaps in the prisoner manifests. Names of captured Union soldiers were simply missing. No death certificates, no repatriation logs, just silence. Could some of these names have been deliberately removed from history? And if so, what became of them? Some historians argue that the burning of Richmond's records was little more than a military necessity, a desperate act to prevent Union officers from accessing sensitive logistical or diplomatic details. In the chaos of retreat, the destruction was hurried, incomplete, and unfocused. But others aren't so sure. One persistent theory suggests that certain records were destroyed not to protect military secrets, but to cover financial improprieties, untraceable loans, embezzled gold, or secret overseas dealings. Confederate agents had operated in Europe and the Caribbean throughout the war. Funds were funneled into shadow accounts, and some shipments of cotton and arms were never officially recorded. Without documentation, those trails went cold. Did someone profit in the shadows of the Confederacy's collapse? Another possibility whispered, but never proven, involves espionage. As the war dragged on, both sides employed networks of informants, double agents, and saboteurs. Could Richmond's record fires have been designed to erase the names of collaborators, protect those who had helped the Confederacy from behind Union lines, or perhaps those within the Confederate government who had secretly undermined it? Even within the Confederate ranks, suspicion ran high in the war's final months. Documents may have revealed betrayals, hidden loyalties, coded correspondences, secret meetings. If those records were burned, then so too were the last remaining clues. But perhaps the most provocative suggestion of all is this, that some of the documents burned in Richmond that night contain not just names or numbers, but truths about the origins of the war itself. Could there have been correspondence contradicting the public justifications of secession? Could high-ranking officials have discussed aims that were never admitted publicly? Did certain Southern leaders know from the beginning that the war could not be won? We may never know. Today, the city of Richmond bears little trace of the inferno that consumed it in 1865. Modern buildings stand where records once smouldered. Government offices have been rebuilt, statues erected, removed, debated and replaced. But beneath it all, the ashes of a vanished archive still rest, and with them the questions. What documents were never meant to survive? What secrets were sealed by fire? And if even a single crate had been saved, if a single folder had escaped the flames, what might it have revealed about the Confederacy's final hours, or its hidden beginnings? As Richmond's burning records drifted into ash and silence further north, far beyond the official battle lines, another Civil War mystery was quietly taking root. This one, however, did not end in smoke, but in gold that vanished without a trace. Tucked in the green hills of northern Vermont, St. Albans feels far removed from the smoke and thunder of Civil War battlefields. A quiet colonial town surrounded by farmland and whispering maples, it stands just 15 miles from the Canadian border. But on October 19, 1864, this tranquil town became the unlikely stage for the northernmost Confederate attack of the entire war. An event that would leave behind a trail of confusion, international tension, and a missing fortune that has never been recovered. It began just after 3 p.m. when a group of well-dressed men, many with southern accents, simultaneously entered 3 banks in St. Albans, the First National, the Franklin County Bank, and the St. Albans Bank. Within moments, weapons were drawn, customers and tellers were forced to the floor. The assailants moved with precision. This was not a spur-of-the-moment robbery, but a coordinated assault. Within minutes, the men had seized over $200,000 in banknotes and coins, roughly equivalent to more than $3 million today. They set fire to parts of the town in an effort to sow chaos and cover their escape. Then, just as swiftly as they had arrived, they vanished, riding north toward the Canadian border under the cover of fading daylight. These were not common criminals. They were Confederate operatives, part of a bold plan to destabilize the North, steal funds for the Southern War effort, and open a new front by drawing British Canada into the conflict. But the mystery here goes deeper than just an unexpected raid. Among the stolen assets, there was one item, or rather one shipment, that has never been fully accounted for. A Union Army payroll reportedly en route to a nearby encampment, and temporarily stored in the vault of the First National Bank. Officially, there is no surviving document that confirms the full contents of that shipment. Some suggest it was routine pay for a local regiment. Others claim it was an unusually large sum, perhaps as much as $87,000 delivered in anticipation of troop movements or recruiting operations in the region. Strangely, although this payroll is mentioned in several post-trade newspaper accounts and survivor testimonies, it appears to vanish from official Union Army logs shortly after the incident. Receipts stop, no formal accounting is completed. Some have suggested that the army deliberately obscured its existence to avoid embarrassment. Others suspect something more. Why would the Union Army quietly write off such a large sum? Could it be that the funds weren't meant for soldiers at all? Eyewitnesses described the Confederate raiders as moving directly toward the vault, almost as if they knew what they were looking for. One bank employee later remarked that they made no effort to open other drawers. They went straight for the central chest. The chest, he added, had only been placed there the day before, delivered by wagon under light guard. How did the Confederates know it would be there? One theory posits that the raid was informed by an insider, possibly a Confederate sympathizer embedded in the North, or even a local with divided loyalties. Vermont, after all, was not immune to the social fractures of the war. Though solidly pro-Union, the state had its share of renters, and its proximities to Canada offered a convenient escape route for anyone seeking to slip quietly across borders. Another theory suggests that the gold never left St. Albans at all. Despite accounts of the raiders galloping toward Canada with heavy saddlebags, Union troops searching the nearby woods found no trace of the missing coins or banknotes. Some of the stolen money was later recovered from the Confederate agents who were arrested in Canada after international pressure, but the amount recovered was far less than what had been taken. So where did the rest go? In the decades that followed, stories began to circulate of strange digging in the Vermont hills at night, of locals who suddenly came into unexplained wealth, of whispers that the Confederates, fearing pursuit, buried the gold in a forest clearing, planning to retrieve it later. One popular tale claims that a specific outcrop near Highgate Springs, about 5 miles from the raid, was marked with carved initials supposedly left as a signpost for returning agents. Yet no confirmed evidence of such a stash has ever been unearthed. Metal detectors, amateur historians and professional archaeologists have all scoured the area. Nothing. Others believe the mystery is rooted not in the forest but in paper, that the real value taken from the bank wasn't coins or notes at all, but documents, letters, cipher keys, proof of Union operations or internal divisions, perhaps passed to the Confederacy through neutral, Canadian channels. This idea, while less romantic than buried gold, raises troubling questions. Was the St. Albans raid more than just a financial crime? Could it have been a smokescreen for something larger, an information heist? If so, what was taken? And why after the war did Union officials never pursue a deeper inquiry into the matter? Was silence the cost of secrecy? Today, the town of St. Albans carries the memory of the raid with quiet pride. A small plaque commemorates the event, and reenactments are held each year. But beneath the civic memory lies a lingering absence, an unanswered question that haunts the historical record like a half-finished ledger. What truly happened to the lost Union payroll? Was it stolen for gold or stolen for secrets? And if it was hidden, whether in the woods, in a Canadian vault, or in the pages of forgotten correspondence, might it still be out there waiting to be uncovered? Or did it, like so many wartime truths, simply vanish into the fog of conflict? As shadows lengthen over the hills of Vermont, and unanswered questions linger among hidden ledgers and lost gold, our journey shifts south, once more toward a field forever changed by blood and fire. Here, beneath towering boulders and windswept grass, a different kind of mystery endures, not one of missing treasure, but of lingering presence. Just southwest of the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, nestled in a rocky outcropping of lichen-covered granite, lies a place known as Devil's Den. The name itself predates the Civil War, whispered in local legend and laced with unease, but it was during the harrowing days of July 1863 that this jagged terrain earned its infamy. On the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, Devil's Den became the site of fierce combat, an eerie maze of boulders and ravines that turned into a killing ground. Confederate sharpshooters took positions in the rocks, trading deadly fire with Union forces advancing across the nearby wheat field. By nightfall, the rocks were slick with rain and blood. Hundreds lay dead or dying, their final moments echoing off stone, and then silence. But the silence did not last. Almost immediately after the war, strange stories began to emerge from the area. Locals spoke of lights in the rocks moving without source or sound. Soldiers returning to pay their respects reported hearing cries in the distance where no one stood. Photographers and tourists in the early 20th century described unexplainable phenomena, the feeling of being watched, sudden drops in temperature, and most curiously, encounters with a man who wasn't there. This figure, most often described as barefoot, dishevelled, and wearing a butternutted Confederate uniform, has become one of the most widely reported apparitions in Gettysburg. He is said to appear near the boulders, sometimes posing for photographs, sometimes giving tourists odd instructions, then vanishing before their eyes. One commonly shared account comes from the 1970s when a couple exploring Devil's Den claimed to encounter a man matching this description. He reportedly emerged from behind a rock, looked them directly in the eyes, and said only one sentence: "What you're looking for is over there." Then he turned, stepped behind a boulder, and was gone. Many dismissed this as the imagination or the tricks of stress and sunlight, but similar stories have surfaced for decades, remarkably consistent in detail. What then are we to make of these reports? Historians acknowledge that Devil's Den was home to brutal fighting. The terrain made orderly burials difficult. Many bodies lay exposed for days, and hastily dug graves were often shallow or incomplete. Could it be that such suffering left something behind? Not in a literal sense, but in the emotional fabric of the place. Psychologists and paranormal researchers alike have long explored the idea of residual energy, the theory that traumatic events can imprint themselves on locations, creating a kind of atmospheric echo. These echoes, it said, are not conscious spirits, but moments replaying again and again, like grooves in a worn-out record. Might the Devil's Den figure be one such echo? Others are less inclined to believe in imprints and energy. Some suggest that the entire phenomenon is a result of collective suggestion. Gettysburg is a place of powerful historical memory. Visitors arrive primed to feel something: grief, reverence, awe. In such a state, it's argued the mind becomes susceptible to filling in blanks, interpreting natural sights and sounds in emotionally charged ways. But this doesn't account for the photographs. Over the years, several images have surfaced taken by unsuspecting tourists, which appear to capture shadowy figures where none were visible at the time of shooting. While some have been debunked as tricks of light or photographic error, others remain unexplained. The National Park Service does not endorse these accounts, but neither does it actively deny them. Park rangers, when asked, often respond with quiet smiles or knowing shrugs. Then there are more speculative theories. Some suggest that Devil's Den was considered a sacred site long before the Civil War, that its strange energy predates the battle entirely. Indigenous legends from the Susquehannock people reference the area as a place of great power, sometimes associated with danger, sometimes with healing. Could the land itself play a role in the phenomena reported? And what of the name, Devil's Den? Before a single rifle was fired in 1863, locals already whispered about the place. The most popular origin story involves a large snake allegedly named the devil that once lived among the rocks, but folklore scholars believe the name may reflect deeper superstitions that the rocks were unnatural, out of place, or inhabited by forces unseen. In an age before scientific geology, what better explanation for a chaotic pile of boulders than something infernal? Could it be that Devil's Den has always been a liminal space, a thin place as the Celts once called it, where the boundary between worlds grows faint? And if so, what does that mean for those who died there? Are the stories of ghostly figures simply our way of giving voice to the past, to honour what was lost, or to make sense of so much pain? Or is it possible that something still lingers among the stones? Even today, visitors continue to report odd experiences. Cameras fail to operate. Footsteps echo where none should. Some hear whispers in the grass or sense cold fingers brushing past them in the heat of summer. Few leave unchanged. As the sun dips behind the hills and the boulders cast long shadows over the land, Devil's Den becomes quiet once more. But in that quiet, if one listens closely, there's something else. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling, a presence, a question. What really walks among these rocks? Is it memory, myth, something we've yet to understand?